Do it live. We have to start with, some kind of weird head bobbing movement to cause people to run and panic in fear. Okay, now that's getting scary. You look like one of those Buddha drawings. Yeah. Very cool. So here we are for dev meeting 34, 35-ish, whatever. I've been going on for, of course, over a year now. Every couple weeks we do a live stream, and we first and foremost advertise it to our Portal Mountain lobby on Telegram. So let's do that. Let's get the chat up and running. Pop out the chat.
That's a good burrito.
Oh yeah?
Oh yeah.
Let our people know. PM, YouTube, chat. Oh, Telegram is not up. Yep.
Right, we were talking about trust and rapport.
Yes. Yeah, so today we're going to continue off discussing a book project we are working on. And we kind of went through what we figure is going to be approximately the first half, the first third, something like that. We're going to go over all that again quickly, if we can.
No, we are.
Maybe the first hour.
We're time boxed.
Yep.
Which means we have a hard stop after an hour.
Sure. Cool. So it's 1 o'clock now, 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to review and fill in any details that we missed. We're trying to sort out the chapters so that they make sense flowing from one to another. And YouTube chat. Here we go. Yeehaw. Okay, and we're just going to copy this to the Telegram peoples. Copy, close. Of course, we've got our sacred sacrament, the wonderful burrito, going. And of course, these are development meetings. They are kind of geared towards Portal Mountaineers who are already caught up with a lot of what we're doing. So there's terminology and stuff which has been developed over the years. So you could see it as a lexicon of jargon, which has a self-referential meaning web or map or net.
All the things.
So yeah, so the words that we use, we try to keep them as close to common understanding as possible, while in context making them much more useful if possible.
No, that's like literally the criteria of adopting a term.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
Not if possible,
If it
but
doesn't
generally,
do that, then yeah.
nothing would become a term unless it could be properly
Right.
referenced.
So we are advertised. So yeah, so this is the second part of this, in which this meeting we are trying to be a little bit more productive, more intentional in what we're doing. And what we're doing is going over this kind of book outline idea, which I plan to do the majority of the writing and then just let people edit and add their stuff, and hopefully we'll end up with something that we can utilize. I'm hoping in a kind of educational type of setting, like to be able to kind of help onboard people into Portal Mountain. Just, you're able to read a book and everything's kind of in one place. I think that's one of the things we're missing right now. We do have a large collection of materials, but it's kind of like, it's not really organized in a proper narrative that would help people to digest it.
Yeah, the soundbite, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Lobby chat. Where are you? There we go. Okay, cool. All right, so I guess we'll kind of dive right into this stuff here. Before we do that, I just want to note that I made a post on Reddit after last 2 weeks ago our dev meeting, and it was well received. I think 30 plus upvotes. People liked it. The title and the question was, how do we, or is there a way to address the problems of the spectacle in a way that doesn't simply get recuperated by the spectacle and turned back into useless?
Trinkets.
Yeah. So, I don't know if we maybe want to just start with that quickly, because it's kind of interesting discussion.
Well, you'd have to drive it because you know more
Yeah.
of the happenings.
Yeah. Does it? Where would that fit in with the book? I guess just the fact that yes, there is some, like, our answer would be yes, there is a way of doing it in a way that doesn't get instantly recuperated. Somebody made a comment on that thread saying essentially, like, this question is sort of outdated according to the theory because it's understood now that every movement or rebellion that happens is, they use the term pre-corporated, but we're kind of just saying pre-cuperated. And what we mean by that is that it's coming out as sound bites that are already meant to slot into this ego stacking system for egos to understand, for agents to act upon. And at no point is there really a rebellion, quote unquote, of the body coming up out to speak.
Yeah, look, the system is not being rebelled against. Elements of the system sure are. But ultimately, we agree with that assessment in the sense that there is no what would you call it? There is no organization that you can put down on paper that would behave and act in the sense that isn't subject to being recuperated.
Right.
So I think that's where we agree with the sentiment, actually, and we like the way it was stated explicitly. And yes, we do agree with that, and we do also agree with the notion that the effort that should be undertaken should not be done in the format of dismantling the system as it is.
Right.
For various reasons, we've already touched on this ourselves. For various reasons, one of them is that the system responds with violence to such attempts in general.
Mm-hmm.
But the other problem is, again, what we call the soundbite. No soundbite is ever expressed without meaning. So if you're utilizing anything soundbite-like, you're already recuperated by the system from the get-go. Now, so with all that said, it just means what that means that the existing system is like reutilizing the existing systems will continually just perpetuate itself rather than fix anything about the spectacle.
Right.
So we
And
definitely agree there.
This gets to really, it's just pushing into like spiritual religion type concepts of how is the self operating in its environment to interpret information, these sound bites.
Yeah.
And that's where we're kind of pointing at, is you can't just feed sound bites and expect, like, as if giving instructions to an army and expect the best case to happen. And this is why we put education as the fundamental, like one of the most fundamental guilds.
Before that, I wanted to touch on the fact that to get around this problem of sound bites already being recuperated, if you will, is not in the changing of the sound bites themselves, but in rearranging them in such a way that make it the sound bites about the sound bites.
Right.
And in doing so, you expose the mechanism that you were just talking about, and
so,
why it feels all spiritual to begin with.
So this is the fundamental exit from precuperation.
Right. And in our case, this is what we call model speak. and alludes back to the idea of why we have taken certain terminology
Mhm.
and given them a slightly different definition based on their connotations.
Now, this also adds the classic challenge of, well, aren't you just talking in circles? Isn't it just your, like fart sniffing circle in itself, and like has nothing to do with anything, and like all these arguments of people who want the soundbite instruction.
It certainly can be that.
Like fart sniffing circle. Fart sniffing circle.
Well,
Closely related.
yes and no. The yes part is that it is a conversation that talks in circles, but it is a conversation about talking in circles and the consequences of that.
Right.
So the effort is not just to talk in circles, but also make the commentary about what it is that is circling. And in that context, what we are pointing to is that when we discuss what the goals are, is to basically bridge the content of the circling with the content of being the circle in itself.
Yeah,
And-
right.
and-
So
and
this
that's
weird like
why-
fractal ingress to kind of get into the self-reference, understanding of the self, of who we are, as a prerequisite to the skillful interpretation of sound bites.
So in some sense, yes, it is talking in circles, but in the same almost tautological sense, there's a justification for that being the necessary conversation to begin with.
Right.
And the analysis of talking in circles itself needs to be circled around perpetually for that to happen.
Right. And so people who are activated by what we call the zeitgeist, in other words, the feeling of something, a void of culture, a void, something missing in the world, just constant grinding pain and suffering and all that.
The experience
People-
itself is the soul.
People in a precuperated state are demanding soundbite answers. In other words, external solutions to the problem that, we just do this and then this will fix that. But this always amounts to a patchwork which never addresses the fundamental problem, which continues to cause the zeitgeist to exist, which is that disconnect between mind and body, the breakaway civilization that emerges from it. And this can only be addressed by looking inward and fixing up some things before you start, before you can handle such sound bites to say, okay, if we do this, that will help. If we do this, that will help.
So, just to step back a little, I want to mention that this isn't a kind of a conversation that says the trauma does not occur to you and then the victim blames you to fix whatever is wrong with your feelings with regard to the trauma you've experienced, and then let the world continue to railroad you. Rather, it's the point of stepping within is more about the recognition that the world needs. The world is in a particular state that isn't very healthy towards the people that live in it to begin with, which causes trauma to happen, and in that insight to locally correct those broken relations with the potential for these relationships to continue correcting themselves on greater and greater scales over time.
Right.
That's sort of the feel for it. So this is so in that it's much more abstract than pinpointing specific people with their specific problems, and so none of this conversation is meant to direct an individual with a specific problem to fix themselves rather than the situation that they're facing.
Right. And that's that's a great point. And I don't want to use that as a cop-out because that's what often people will say, like, what do you do about the world and the problems in the world? And people will say, and this is one of the responses we got actually for this this post that was made. One response by Misguided Spectacle, which was really great, stating like I feel like the theories move past this, and they actually mentioned the precuperation that happens, in that we're already kind of built and used to slotting into this ego stack mechanism via soundbite. The ontological matrix is what we're used to utilizing, but that's what also precuperates the whole thing. There's no real escape from that.
So long as you use its language, you are at its whims.
And
So the point
yeah.
of stacking up another meaning to the language is to take back some of that recuperation and turn the soundbite in and on itself,
Right.
so that it could be investigated for
Right.
what it is.
And this is ultimately what the answer to the question that I pose with this: how to address the problems of the spectacle in a way that doesn't get recuperated. It's that turning inward the soundbite onto the soundbite, and gaining a skill of skillfulness, the skill of interpretation.
With regard to the soundbite.
That's the way. So in other words, we can't just take everything literally and interface with a machine, a ontological matrix, and agencies that operate in a literalistic sense.
In a fiat-controlled,
Right.
authoritative way.
So we've discussed this in labeling it as the spectrum of stupidity, objectivism versus solipsism, as different flavors of how that can go wrong. And there is a way to get around this, and that's what we've been working on. So yeah, this was a great response there. Misguided Spectacle went into cooperatives as kind of like an alternative, or like a proto-alternative, and
Which we're already looking at, really.
yeah, so, and I like that. It does seem, and there's also unionization was mentioned. So these kind of feel like people power, but ultimately
Internally, they would be still structured just in the same
they need
way.
to be empowered with this
Self-reference.
social DNA, which includes that self-reference, the tribe of tribes, as well as like this internal demand and supply dynamics we've been talking about, has to be first and foremost.
As a means of shelter in the internal world.
Right, like it's still a competition of just a bunch of owners and the politics of how to run the company, and at the end of the day, everyone goes home to their own family, kind of
Disconnected from the whole.
with their own problems, and is unable to bring up those problems to the company. The company doesn't care. It's doing a specific thing to get capital off the market, right? That's all it's concerned with, essentially. So it's not fundamentally different. It's a structure that seems to group people together into like
Well,
people
this is
power.
the recuperation that we're speaking about. As soon, like even a good idea such as fixing the social problems and physical problems with the world, tend to succumb to the internal structure of politics, which amount to the same game, just in a different flavor.
Right. Right. So one other, I just wanted to bring it up that it's the classic. There was another response here. Thank you to Flood Reason. Their response, I'll just read it out here, but you'll get the idea. To simplify, for one's own psychological well-being and deprogramming, an effective daily practice of some sort is needed, which releases psychological problems and imprints, i.e. somatic experiencing, some sort of meditative practice, qigong, plant medicine, etc. I agree with that. That needs to be done. On the individual basis, there are things we can do to try and heal ourselves. But again, this seems like maybe putting the load on the shoulders of the individual and leaving it at that there is no collective type of emergence that can deal with this. So
we're in total agreement when it comes to that, and I think that's what I touched on earlier, was stating that, like we're not, what we're talking about is too abstract to say, if you have this specific problem, you need to do X, Y, Z, and all of that problem is solved. This is not what we're saying, and then victim blame the individual. That society,
Right.
the society is, or victim blame the society in general.
But
But
rightly pointed out.
we're merely recognizing that as a whole, the abstract machine that we're dealing with is not structured in a way that is useful or helpful to us specifically. We are incidentally benefiting from it to some degree, and are more often than not railroaded in other respects. So yes, we pretty much state something very similar in that, to some degree, it starts from within the individual, and then bursts out into the collective as a certain amount of threshold is reached. Recognition of another individual going through the same journey, for example, would be a threshold. The ability to discuss this
Right.
with others would be another threshold. We'd refer to these as degrees of coherence.
Right.
And as you can see by that label itself, like, we're discussing a kind of a instrumental sort of harmony coming into place, which it does depend on the individual instruments coming into it at a certain timing and resonance, and sorry, not resonance, but in a certain wavelength and all of that jazz. And of course, it's an entirely self-feedbacking system in which you play the wrong note at the wrong time, it wouldn't sound correct with the other instruments, and you'd know it by that.
Right.
And there's nothing to make a note wrong on its own. So.
And this kind of, to me, brings up a big theme, I think, of this book, is that the entropy stacking of layers, complex adaptive systems, and just seeing an individual human as a kind of a node on a layer, if you will, upon which the social operating system emerges. So just to continue on with this comment here, this is where it kind of, I don't think there's a good common understanding of what the spectacle is. So the healthier you get, the less urge to participate in fake culture, right? As if it's that simple. Okay, yes, but due to commodification, to ignore the spectacle is to die an economic death. You don't just ignore it, you don't not participate in it. It's literally latched in and attached to all of your
Every interaction you have with anything outside of yourself, really.
Right. There's no way that you can just put your head in the clouds and not be part of this. It's impossible.
Well, this is one of the reasons I mentioned earlier in a different setting, that the response to the zeitgeist alone, just its recognition, is universally painful. Because it's an immediate response by the system of saying, like, you can't separate. Otherwise, I will destroy everything you are about, or have been. Everything you know, basically.
Right.
The ego. Memories, personality, character. No, not character, sorry.
So just to, I'll just continue this comment here. There is nothing you can do for others but demonstrate how to be healthy, quote unquote, if you are that. You cannot force others to participate. Becoming psychologically healthy is a journey everyone has to do for themselves. So again, like, this is getting at that idea that we have to kind of heal ourselves, fix ourselves first. But it's kind of like, now it's on the line of, like, we can't force, but, like, there is a social emergence to what we do, right? That has
Yes.
an effect and resonance on others, right? So there is, it's not that there's nothing we can do.
It's that insight, that step of recognition that another, despite having a different language for it, despite having a different application of it, seeing the same zeitgeist to a degree, in that there is a lack in the world that has something to do with an external mechanism that is slaughtering us inhumanely. Like, the basis of recognizing that another person is recognizing that and just being able to communicate about it to any extent whatsoever.
Right. That is something.
Is a step above.
It's already a resonance at a quote higher layer.
Yeah, it's a step above than feeling something and just working on yourself. Now you know that it's not merely a personal journey, it's a collective journey as well. But with a collective journey, it looks vastly different. It being a collective, not an individual one.
Now, I think part of that, like you're saying, the pain response to feeling and perceiving the zeitgeist is one that we want to kind of put a lid on right away, shut it down. And comments like this I'll continue. The comments like as I continue here kind of show that, I think, that kind of retreat. So again, so you cannot force others to participate. Becoming psychologically healthy is a journey for everyone has to do for themselves. Fine, okay. There is nothing beyond that. The sense of victimization by society, by the world, and the urge that comes from that sense of victimization, quote, to do something about it, vanishes with psychological health.
But psychological health is highly dependent on the context in which you find yourself. If the
Right.
same world keeps badgering you
Right.
for completely random shit, then how does that psychological health come about? Well,
So-
that's where our
Exactly.
response comes
The
from.
body is still hurting in pain. It's going to keep
it's-
being in pain.
So the response is basically in that second phase of recognizing the others, right? That sense of unity, actually, in its collective feedback, adds to the kind of health this person is trying to point to. That stuff, in terms of mentally fixing yourself to respond to the world more appropriately for as an individual, does and should bleed out to the collective as a unified, so to speak, set of people. And why? Because strictly speaking, we're all just copies of each other. We're not isolated things. But second to that is that this reinforces a greater and more stable psychological environment for more people at the same time. Having that support, having that understanding from the other people adds to your individual psychological health. And as a group, having people who are getting psychological healthy together creates a more healthy social environment,
Right.
to facilitate for that psychological health. So that would
Yes.
be my direct response to why
Absolutely.
you can't stop there and should not even think that way.
So I'll conclude with the very last sentence here, / paragraph. The problem of the spectacle is solved by the individual on the individual level. And again, we can't deny that, but there is emergence. And there's more to it, and there's feedback, and things go up, and they upload and they download, right, on a social emergent level. So yeah, these were the two main responses.
All I'm saying that it's lacking the insight into the feedback of where a collective of such progress can actually interact with itself and raise to a different capacity environment, a different categorical way of thinking, and so on.
Right.
Notice I said still categorical, so we're talking about delusions and matrices and so stuff like that. So I'm not denying that that's still part of it.
Right. Yes. So yeah, that's this type of a social emergence from that type of work is what we're talking about. This is what the guild is. It's what it's made of.
And we think we're stepping on a lot of people's toes by stepping outside of this personalized realm and playing the card, you should do this if you want that, which is definitely the charlatan's game. The difference, of course, is that we not only flat out state that this is the charlatan's game and we are participating in a similar fashion. But what we do want to point out is that rapport, trust, and then faith are very much necessary to this understanding, and by that we hope that
Right.
that the whole charlatanism element of it is at least negated through negative feedback.
Right. Negative feedback through the sound bites pointing to themselves and extinguishing the literalistic
the potential for it. Yeah.
extinguishing the literalistic types of interpretations.
Yeah.
So
So it's a process in a sense.
the charlatan would be giving sound bites in the hopes of a literalistic interpretation. That way, there's a kind of command and control sort of structure.
Yeah.
Whereas this is fundamentally we try to be different.
metaphorical.
And explicitly through negative feedback extinguish those types
Yeah.
of flight.
But by negative feedback, it means that certain iterations have to occur for it to even happen, and it's the lack of those iterations that would really set apart the charlatan from the correct work.
So,
And it's a specific kinds of iterations. If they don't happen, you probably will never know. Well, you could by the zeitgeist, but still. That's the other clue. This, in the recuperated spectacle, the zeitgeist is still there, unaffected in any way. It is when the zeitgeist itself begins to lose the grip that you have enough evidence to see that this is something correct.
in other words, when the void, the things that are missing in our soul, begins to kind of backfill
Yeah.
with some substance.
Right. That isn't being recuperated back and causing you further dread down the road. It's this lack of dread down the road that's really. And here's the deal. This description is entirely qualitative, which means that it's going to be different for different people in terms of what materialistically that looks like. It's not going to depend on quantities of things or categories of ideas. It's going to be a quality that is persistent from moment to moment within the person's experience of the world itself. So absolutely, it dives into, again, personal work, but I think this is where we're stepping on people's toes, is that this personal work does have a particular spillage into the social framework of the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're trying to really get to with this work. Hence the question as to per your post, right? Really, it's like, how do you do the social soundbite interaction that doesn't threaten the system to begin with, which gets it extinguished immediately, and at the same time doesn't victim blame and doesn't recuperate via charlatanism.
Right. So how to address the problems of the spectacle in a way that doesn't get recuperated is to act in a way that is not from a precuperated stance to begin with. And this involves what we were talking about with education and like starting up a company regarding training and certification and...
Well, the language is the part that we're talking about when you say education. Model speaking, knowing what the pointers are, and all
and
that
language
stuff.
is reality, right? So if we can talk about something, that makes it real.
Well, that's the thing, that it's the mythology that gives sound bites meaning. Right? If a soundbite is plugged into a certain context, there's your meaning. Like, you always look at a meme, you already know by the expression of the face, by even the size of the nose, what the fuck the meme is all about, right? Like, size of the nose, obviously they're talking about Jews.
The nose knows.
Right? Like, how do we know it so immediately? It's because these things are already preconceived in the interpretations of whatever lines we see.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. It is subtle, but yeah, education.
And
flipping it back on itself.
we should probably get going with the book now, because we did.
So we
decimated
we
post.
have been. So these are the first two kind of chapters. Is the zeitgeist, that there's something missing in the soul. You can feel it deep down. There's where this life isn't all that it either once was or could be or
Not
should be.
in the soul. It is the soul of the
Right.
whole.
Yeah.
Soul is the individual void of neglect that is left behind. Again, a quality of experience itself.
And this is once again our definition. And I'm always loose with words and definitions.
So yeah, but like to nail it down really for this and that, like if you take the soul to be the personal version of zeitgeist, for example, recognizing that you have the same neglected void internally, just that recognition that, oh, I'm not alone in this, that's the zeitgeist. It's like, oh, this really is broken out there too. It's not just me broken and feeling this way. It's not entirely my quality of the experience. It's the quality of the human race experience.
So
and that's the difference. It's different for everybody.
Interesting
obviously.
thing about that definition and usage is it still carries this feeling that the soul has a destiny to it.
That archaic storytelling feeling, yeah.
And that destiny is the healing of the soul, the
Yep.
healing of what's been done to us.
Yeah, and this was
Quote,
done
unquote.
this was done on purpose. But again, as we are trying to explain, the point is to take old
What we've
terms,
done to ourselves.
old terms, and make them actually meaningful to a degree that actually speaks to other individuals without the baggage of religious mumbo jumbo that doesn't apply anymore, or is flat out done for subversive purposes.
Right. So I'll just pull up some notepad here. So the zeitgeist here, and we have the quote from Morpheus for this one. We were thinking of flavor text probably for each chapter, but Morpheus, the matrix is everywhere. It's all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. And Neo says, what truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, into a prison that you cannot taste or see or touch. A prison for your mind. And so this is the breakaway civilization. This is the process of commodification of all life, of which we are nearing, like, quote-unquote, the end, in which all-encompassed commodification of all life. In other words, we've been turned into dead husk machine, operating in an ontological matrix via stupidity in literal interpretation of sound bites and actions.
We're basically just button pushers and lever pullers for a mechanism that would soon replace you with another working mechanism,
Right.
then deal with anything that you particularly cared for.
As in your needs. So first chapter, the zeitgeist, just to entice the reader, if you will, to hook them into that we all kind of feel something deep down isn't right. So this would be the first part of the book. The charlatan is the one who comes along and purports to fill that void with something, and they always, like we were just saying, they want to give a soundbite which is interpreted literally. That way their word becomes law in a sense, and can be used to control large groups of people to do things. It's a puppet mastery in the same way that the system masters us.
So and ultimately the void remains unfilled. The system continues to operate with the same ideals of authority and hierarchy, except now you've given it a slightly different series of words to repeat the exact same soundbite, yet feeling like it's a different one.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So we're just getting into the meat of the book here. One point there I wanted to note that I think is important is that even anything we say has to be filtered through a systemic soundbite type of architecture. This is language, right? We are, when we speak, giving top-down approximations of reality in which can't immediately be distinguished from any charlatan, quote-unquote, who has only literalist objectives in mind.
And so you'll never hear us claim the opposite. In fact, we'll remind you all the time that everything we're saying has to have the carries with it a connotation that is both systemic and from the perspective of the language that we've been using. And so some of these interpretations, like say we use the word soul, would immediately turn off certain individuals for simply utilizing the word and categorizing the entire soundbite as woo, right? So there's definitely a disconnect that can happen with merely using sound bites instead of just constantly reiterating back onto them in a self-referential way that exposes and eliminates these kinds of misinterpretations.
Right. So it really is a special difference that the guide, as we've juxtaposed against the charlatan, the guide will, as soon as possible, attempt to steer the soundbite onto itself, to say, oh, we are discussing this, and to go kind of inward into the experience, the subjectiveness of interpretation.
Of how the soundbite can be interpreted this way versus that way, and
Right.
what constitutes this interpretation.
And that implies a responsibility.
And how does that get represented after the fact so that you can communicate it?
Right. And all of this implies a responsibility on the part of the interpreter to take sound bites and think, I guess, whatever, thoughtfully, creatively, with an open mind about.
Apply faith. Because
Right.
faith is the process of taking a sound bite and allowing it to fill the moment so that you can see its feedback.
Right, and by filling the moment, this is kind of that heaven-earth connection, the body-mind connection.
In simple terms, suspending disbelief.
Right. And trying your best, yeah, with a soundbite, taking a soundbite, trying your best to see what it does.
Right. What does a soundbite look like if I believe it? What does the soundbite look like if I don't believe it but other people believe it? What does it sound like? And so on and so forth.
Yeah. Right.
Which will give a kind of a interesting picture, because even things that you might not believe to be true at all are true to other people, and it really does affect your ability to communicate with them if you fail to distinguish that. A lot of people pick battles with other people because they're trying to change the way they are thinking, but the question is I tend to have is, what context are these battles being picked? Is it just over the dinner conversations and are you just stirring the pot, or is there like actual familial issues that result out of the wrong thinking? If there's no issues resulting from the wrong thinking and it's just how somebody carries on in the world, why would you need to tinker in their minds? It's these kinds of questions that pop up out of this. So what is real and what is unreal becomes really less of an important issue. But what you do with that information at each given instance becomes the only thing that's of importance. So that's the final kind of my personal take on the whole circumstance.
Right. It reminds me of that old adage, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man a fish, he could eat for life.
How about you give them a fish and then teach him? Because have you ever tried to teach somebody who's hungry?
Give a man a fish and then teach him
Yeah.
fish, and he'll eat for life.
You can't teach the hungry, not very well.
Right.
And the fact that there are hungry people within the system should point to something.
And again, this kind of reminds me, like, oh, we're so special giving instructions or commands and all that. But we're on a learning journey ourselves. We are wrong all the time.
I was thinking about this, and we do have a particular limitation with specific insight, and that has to do with the world of industry itself. Like, we don't have enough insight to take the social operating system to its full extent and know which exact, we haven't been able to come up with exact products as you were talking about before, as a solid ground of like, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. We simply don't have the kind of we don't have the kind of people that would know these things, and we ourselves have not enough knowledge for it.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's our limitation right there.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, even temperamentally, you're like hyper abstract or super abstract, and I'm like just abstract. But even me talking to people, it's like I'm in the clouds, right? So.
Yeah, you can imagine it's like a hyper version.
It's even
of that
worse
for
for
me.
you. So yeah, we acknowledge that. I don't know how to tell a good story really, like, but I kind of overlap on that a bit. Like I have more ability to get into context with people and understand like where you're coming from. Okay, like maybe you need to hear this or that to help to understand this or that.
It's funny to me.
But for you, it's like even worse.
For me, in order to really, really get into the shit I'm saying, if you're a normal person, you need Adderall. You need Adderall
Probably.
to like fucking stay like
Right.
be able to focus at least long enough.
Yeah, like you have often almost no way to hook people, but you're more than 100% willing to give the soundbite and like the some insight, but it just comes across as like some kind of Zen cone, everything that comes out of your mouth, right? Like did that or did that have anything to do with what was just said, or did it not? I don't know.
Like no, my main what do you call it? It's not a problem. It's for me it's an entertainment. But the character that Ian created for us, the characters, the goat,
Right.
and how I immediately went, okay, the goat will appear in a coughing fit out of nowhere with a cloud of smoke, right? Will say something that you cannot comprehend at all. It sounds relevant, but you don't know why or how. Then take a big toke and disappear, which is why I was arrived coughing, right? So that's like the imagery, but the point is that the statement that I've said only ever makes sense after the fact of something happening. It's like, oh, that's what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the story of my life, basically. It's only like after and it has nothing to do with like being like special or anything. It's just patterns.
Well, sure.
Like,
you could see it as a disability in some way, and ability in other ways.
Well, yeah, I get hung up on them in terms of hyperfocus, and at the same time, tend to see complications that aren't necessarily subtleties.
Not necessarily relevant to the current context.
But they
like
are.
fun fact.
But they are
Sure.
because they drive shit implicitly.
Right.
There's subtle stuff.
But the connection there to the ongoing story and context is tough to construct.
Well, this is why I tend to like. This is why I'm saying this is fun for me. I can to say in not so many like. Sure, it sounds claimy, but the explanation as to why would the universe create Trump. Like this whole model speaking thing like actually gives me an arc to arrive there.
Mm-hmm.
But how many people are willing to sit through that? Because how much context would I have to bring into it, and just like and tangents, and like it would be like a clusterfuck of explanations. But I'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ability to intersect so well with the ontological matrix and the preconceived notions and all that.
I scare people with it.
So yeah, anyways, let's continue on though. So with the charlatan, we kind of established that trust is necessary. There will be a point where people will actually be able to take on
trust.
Take the faith.
Trust is not just a word.
Take the soundbite on faith and actually try it out.
Yeah, trust is not just a word. Faith is not just a word. We already touched on faith. Trust is the building of rapport. So I'm not just trusting some Joe Schmo No, this is about rapport building. You have to know the individual. You have to develop an actual understanding of who they are, how they speak, if they speak in your interests.
Context.
Yeah, so when we say trust, we're not talking about somebody who has a token, a piece of paper, a
Like-
professional degree,
But even
and you have
yes,
to trust them.
that does add to trust, right, in the system. Like, say, we start up our company,
Well, it is a building of rapport to some extent, except
and you've
that
got a business card. You give the card.
Yes.
Say, I'm a consultant.
absolutely.
Right? We do training and certification.
Absolutely. The issue I'm trying to point at is that you can have a token. And tokenism is a method of bypassing the trust
Right.
circuit.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Like
so
a business
I
card.
want to really stress that it isn't the piece of paper that's important, but the conduct. Like, if the token does not
Right.
match
Yeah.
behavior, the token does not matter.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the token sets up an expectation, which can be very
Tested against.
quickly tested and washed away.
That's
Um,
the point. Yeah.
So yeah, the book, again, we're just kind of trying to review the first half of what we got into before. This is what I've called, I guess, like the introduction. Before we get into any kind of meat, this kind of gets out of the way, the zeitgeist, that we all kind of feel something, and that the charlatan is there ready and waiting to exploit that, and that we appear as charlatans, definitely, and that's unavoidable. And then let's go from there. It's unavoidable. Why? And what do we actually do about that? Which that develops. But anyway, so getting into the next section, which I kind of titled the section Polymorphic Machine. What I wanted this whole section, so far 8 chapters, whatever, but to convey is the kind of just the positive view, if you will, of life itself, the machine of life, kind of in a way.
So when we talk about the machine of life, we're talking about things like biological, emergent machines, not artificially built ones.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
the distinction is
Bottom up.
the distinction being is that these kinds of machines, while do have an abstract element to how they're constructed, and i.e. how we describe them, at the same
The
time,
manifold is maintained.
at the same time, they're built in such a way that maintains what we call an isomorphism with their previous layers. That's what allows the emergence to happen in the first place. So being
Right.
constrained by that, a polymorphic machine will not adapt to a specific ideal, but rather it would evolve into whatever context it finds itself in organically. Whereas the polymorphic machine attempts to
Market machine.
Whereas the market machine does the opposite, in which it attempts to, which it runs through an ideal and attempts to shape all of the environment around it into that
Right.
ideal.
And this is the literalism, the ego stacking, the
Yeah, but that's the main distinction between what we call the polymorphic machine and the market machine.
Yeah.
And that's only to denote that the word machine itself, in and of itself, is not something that we say is wrong, evil, or anything like that. Do we still
Right.
need that notepad on?
So we're moving to
Okay, so I didn't see that.
polymorphic machine. We're moving down to, so then we got into coherence. So the idea with this is after the charlatan, I wanted to jump into something very concrete to convey this idea that there is a progress to watch for, a progression through higher and higher coherence, right? And this is
Yeah.
just to give like that we're on a journey kind of thing, that the reader can be expecting
also-
to progress in some way, that there is a goal, a destination, quote unquote.
And also to juxtapose the previous previous section that basically says it's bad, and for the most part, all the solutions to it will just continue the shit show, right? This section is sort of to show a
Right.
different vision of using this, of looking at those exact same world with the exact same modes of production that we have now, like aka after we've reached this level of commodification, as it were, that even in that bleak, so to speak, description, there's a parallel description that is actually not bleak, and has a potential for a
Right.
reversal of the emptiness or the voidness or the neglectness that previously discussed.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up in this chapter is the fact that one can gain skill in any field. And that happens through, like, let's say a classic, like mentorship or apprenticeship, where you're learning, let's say, to be a mechanic. So mechanic shop and all that. You start off trusting somebody. They're kind of like your leader, your mentor, whatever. And they are watching you do stuff, and there's kind of a feedback. There has to be the trust. Again, back to the charlatan thing, and you're learning skill.
And notice how that's the description of faith.
Right. So that's already assumed there. We know that faith happens
I'm
everywhere.
I'm pointing that out, that the very first thing that you started to go into in the description of how it could work correctly, you started off with the notion that hints at faith again.
There is
so it
somebody,
starts there.
Somebody you trust.
Yeah, positives.
For whatever reason, you trust this person.
Rapport.
And what they're going to do is give
Not whatever
you...
reason, it's rapport. We have to... That I'm going to...
Well, okay, rapport, fine.
Because
For
that's
reasons of
why...
rapport.
No, model speaking, trust is synonymous.
But again,
with
and
rapport.
this can be shortcutted with either credentialism or all kinds of
Yes,
other...
well, that was my whole point. Rapport is not found in the token. The token is a mechanism of verifying the rapport, but not an indication of it.
Right. Well,
that's the difference
my point,
between
I
our
guess,
that's how we make it non-authoritative.
my point is that anybody can understand this. When you start a new job,
yes, sorry,
you
I
are
did not
there
mean
to
detract.
make money. You don't care. So your boss has told you, okay, listen to this guy. Boom. It doesn't even matter if what he says is right or wrong. You will pick that up. If they are wrong all the time, you're going to understand that right away. However, you've been shortcutted to trust in faith. Take what the sound bites this person is giving you, like, okay, start, take loosening these bolts and all that, but do it in order or something. Or when you put the bolts back on, it has to be a pattern. Like these things that they tell you, you just do it without knowing why.
Well, usually you do it because you don't want to have your hand chopped off by something, either cutting it off or falling on it or whatever.
That reason may be given. It may not.
Sure.
You don't know. It's just instructions. So, and this is the progression of coherence in that field. So you're given a model.
You can actually use the circumstance to understand the charlatanism or lack of in your instructor by how many reasons and what the reasons are that they give you.
If they give, they may not. They may be more stubborn, but that's true. If reason is given, that reason it comes from the body, from experience. It's if you don't do this, this will happen. And personally, I like to hear the reasoning behind why I'm being told an instruction. That's a good positive sign, right? So, but coherence, in the participant coherence, you don't know really why things are done the way they are, ultimately. You just keep doing it until you gain
The feedback comes back. Yeah.
of what's happening, and eventually you internalize what can go wrong, and that's the reasoning of why you're doing things a certain way.
So when it's no longer the instructor giving you the reasons, it's your knowledge that tells you.
You know what's going to happen.
And that's what we call insight. When you've internalized,
Right. So
being aware of something as opposed to being knowledgeable in it.
To continue the point, into coherence in general, we're talking about the skill of skillfulness. So let's say mechanics is a skill. The skill of skillfulness is says implies you're folding back on yourself. The skill of interpretation of instruction, right? To
Right.
know what instruction on a participant level means, and to be able to expect that membership in that instruction is going to emerge from the activity of
So
of
not
doing.
only knowing how the instructions has affected the activity, but also seeing how the instruction changes you and your relationship to the activity, and being aware of the changes to yourself.
Hmm.
Why this is kind of called the skill of skillfulness, because you can apply this into any kind of skill and see it progress.
Exactly.
A-
That's what I wanted to zoom back out
and you do it
on.
on the same terms as learning any other skill, as if it were not a skill
Yes.
of skillfulness. So you're literally turning back onto the idea of learning a skill as learning a skill,
Hmm.
which is learning a skill as learning a skill.
Isn't it strange? But yes, that's the unique skill of skillfulness, and this is what coherence is all about. Coherence in the sense of the 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 journey of increasing coherence. What we mean by that is this
Well,
ability to understand what's going on when we learn things.
I have a practical example. You have specialties in certain fields, I have specialties in certain other fields, correct?
Correct.
We can recognize each other's ability to navigate those fields despite not knowing the specifics of the field itself. Right? We have enough skill about skill itself to recognize that your skill in that area is sufficient or insufficient or whatever, based on the commonalities of skillfulness in and of itself.
Well, you can
The
observe
way-
feedback.
The way you approach feedback and the way I approach feedback could be complementary or not complementary, and in recognition of all of that is the skill of skillfulness.
So in any skill, in any trade or whatever, you can recognize whether somebody has a proficient skill in that, but you can also recognize whether they have the skill of skillfulness in that how they respond to feedback. Like, let's say something goes wrong, but they keep doing it the same way. You can say maybe they're kind of skilled in that, but they're not really dynamic in their skill.
Exactly.
And this is like skill squared or whatever. Yeah. So that's coherence.
Complex skilled.
Um,
Complex numbers.
sure. Yeah.
Square root of I. Square root of -1. Never mind.
Yeah.
Ignore me.
So this would be the first major meat chapter is to say that there is something going on here.
Can we
And
take a short break?
with that, we'll take short break. So we're at our 1 hour mark. Had hoped to already have gone through the dream, the moment, cognitive alignment window.
We did take a few
chronology
actually,
dynamics.
We took a chunk out of the hour for the post, so
Sure.
I'm okay with
Okay.
I'm okay with 20 minutes more.
But let's
that's it.
Let's zoom through and then keep building on this book idea. So with that, we'll be right back. So, who were we's? Yep, just seeing if we can speed through. So we're reclaiming some time here. So coherence, I think we've covered that.
Reclaiming my time.
Yep.
Have you seen that?
Probably, yeah. Political jargons.
Man, they tried to derail that one woman. She didn't let them.
So yeah, with coherence as being like there is a overall like a goal to this book, to what we're doing. There's a progression to look forward to, etc. As well, kind of just showing a general reflection that people do learn skills, but there's also the skill of skillfulness, which is like skill squared or whatever, just kind of a funny thing. So, and then we move on to the dream.
Such a jokester.
And the dream is another kind of like really cliche thing to introduce. Every, I think, religion kind of points at it, hopefully a little bit. The Matrix especially, but things like that.
Well, if you want to go
this idea that we're living in kind of a virtual world.
So that's a very Eastern generally that kind of thinking mentality is coming from the Eastern side of the world.
Yep.
Western civilization is actually very atomic in its interpretations. So atomic in that.
Is that a word?
Atomic means
Atomic.
Atomic in that it's a reductive word, in the sense that everything can be reduced to its smallest components and then everything can be built back up.
Mm-hmm. How does that relate to dream?
In that the Western,
that is a dream too.
In that the Western view facilitates what's called the hard problem of consciousness and separates the dream into the unreal, solipsistic dimension, and only allows for the objective dimension to be called reality. So, so on the one hand, you have where the dream is kind of accepted as part of reality's interpretation, and on the other flip side, it's a complete denial of it as a dichotomous opposition, which philosophically comes up as the hard problem of consciousness.
Seeing just first off an irony in that even this interpretation or view is a dream.
Right.
Well.
No, that is the irony of it, but it completely denies it to be a dream.
Right. So illiterate literalism.
Again.
Classic
strikes again.
Right. Okay.
But to take the dream literally is again a literalism.
Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to do with this is juxtapose with its, the false dichotomy against the moment. So the dream and the moment. This is classic religious type of stuff, Buddhist, whatever. This ability to meditate on the content of what's going on. That's to pull back into the moment, into the, breathe and all this kind of stuff. They, smell your own farts and come back into the moment. Breathe, my friend.
Usually you're in a room with a whole bunch of other people, so you're smelling everybody else's farts too.
Everybody, they all release like right before you're asked to smell.
Not to make fun of the actual points of these religions, they're all come from the same place.
Right.
Of
there is something there, like that people are doing, like that some people are doing. Mostly it gets derailed. The soundbite theater just takes over, literalism, all that.
Well, this is just a matter of entropy. There's more. There's more noise.
Do
to
I look
signal.
like I'm meditating? Look, my legs are crossed. Do I look like it? Okay, good. I'm meditating.
I sent an emoji of a cross-legged man over text. Am I meditating?
That means you're meditating.
Exactly.
Right. So next couple chapters. Any details here? What did we put?
So okay. To that point though, It's because we're talking about representations of the thing rather than the thing, and the representations are of course going to not be the thing, and from a
Always.
different context gonna look ridiculous.
The problem of the spectacle.
Anyway, let's go on.
Right. So the dream and the moment juxtaposed here. This also gives us the opportunity to look into the mind-body disconnect, and deeper into what emerges from that, the breakaway civilization, where a society and the individual, quote unquote, seem horribly disconnected, and the internal and subjective experience of the individual is completely, they're unmet by the outside world. So I think that's great to have that kind of the juxtaposition there, right off the bat, but also to give a kind of direction of towards inner experiencing, like the folding the sound bites in on themselves. How do you do that? Well, it looks something like, okay, everything we do in normal mundane life is kind of like this autonomic dream state, and it's possible to step back and observe the content and structure which is containing that dream state. And this is our like conscious experience, right? So we're kind of pulling back into the body with instruction, right? So this gives like a first taste of that. Yeah, and the ability to pull back and to see that, I think this is, as we noted here, kind of correlated pretty heavily like with membership
And feedback.
a shift of reality, if you will. That there is the moment that we're not just a puppet swept away by the dream, by the thoughts of the dream, but that we can actually stop and look at the content
Well,
of the
membership is really categorized specifically by the ability to look at somebody else and see that they are actually in that same progress in whatever flavor that might be, and not seeing anybody as a different, going through a different phase, process, but rather
dream.
that's what makes them
Resonance.
members to begin with, right? Like, I'm a member of the same club. Why is
Right.
it the same club? Because it's the same thing.
Why would you use the word member if not a
Right.
group?
Right. So the recognition that you're in the group as opposed to it being something that you are taking
Right.
on by yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Just seeing that somebody else took it on himself as well. The recognition of that. You know both
Right.
of you are members.
And so this is the underpinnings of the guild. This kind of turns it towards
Yeah,
that.
and this is why a badge of membership cannot be given to you. You recognize it in others because you recognize it in yourself. That's the badge. It's that recognition, that knowledge, that insight.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yep. Cool. So carrying on, I forget what we decided about the cognitive alignment window. I think that it should be somehow introduced, but this was getting, remember, into the neural operating system
So,
layers,
I'm just gonna.
and we didn't know if we had to.
We reduced it to
get
two
into
layers.
that.
We reduced it to two layers. The one hugging the horizons at the top.
Right.
So
Okay.
the switch
I'll
should
put
be
a
from
note.
the narrative to the objective spectacle. And the reason
Right.
we did that is to simplify.
Yes.
To simplify the jump from dream to moment, because because the moment is what the spectacle is shows, i.e., object appears in the moment. Next moment, object disappears, or moves, or like any one of those things comes back in a slightly different version of itself.
Right. And to
Phased.
recognize
It's
that,
phased.
is to see the structure and content of what's actually underlying beyond the horizon in the shared, the
So, yeah.
smooth formation of
So-
reality.
So before the horizon, the object is appearing, disappearing, phasing, quantumly like in and out of existence, and each phase is how you know a moment has passed after the fact, right? Like you can't. The moment is like an eternal state, if you will, of things appearing and flickering in and out of existence in it, in a permanent fashion kind of deal, in a stable fashion. And the narrative would be the resultant. So one of the objects that will appear will be about all of the different objects that have appeared before. Right, the growing narrative abstraction about those objects that tells you what those objects are to begin with, like what's flashing in and out of existence at all points.
Right.
That's how you know. That carry.
So is that we should get into that early on?
Well,
this difference.
If you're so let me ask you this: if you're stuck in this carryover framework, you're above the horizon because you're only seeing the narrative now. One object supersedes everything else that's actually happening. Right? So the idea to explain dream versus moment is to like, okay, how do you take this and extrapolate back to under the horizon as to what flashed and reappeared and what reappeared?
Exactly.
And that would constitute the moment.
Yep.
So that's kind of
that is what it is. That's needed.
That's the technical explanation of how to do what we just described.
Perfect. So great. So that's the shifting of the cognitive alignment window, and when you do that, you gain access to the archetypal, the mimetic. In other words, the building blocks of your ontological matrix become fuzzy and into question, uncertain. They're allowed for change. This is how we break up our own crusty ways of thinking of reality.
Well, yeah, one of the things that we mention is that it allows the narrative that's been overarching everything to become one of the flashing objects in and out of existence.
Just another one.
That is being assembled from all the other objects. And then from that, you can see the feedback of how this object interacts with the other objects that keep appearing to it and shapes them into something else in their next phase phase.
Right.
And the ability to see that in the same level is what allows you to separate calling the reality of those objects this one extra object that you have, because it's just as unreal.
Yeah.
Just it doesn't mean it's not as functionally useful or something to that effect.
Right.
It just means that it's on the same level as all the unreality of the other objects to begin with.
And to acknowledge it is the most well-tread path through the forest. Through every moment we tread through the forest, through the most walked path is the one that we usually go on. The offshoots that are forming into that path,
they tend to lack what we would call the significant meaning, hence the main path is the one that's treaded.
Right. Just keep walking the same path and over again.
And so if that becomes mechanical, it becomes detached from the whole process itself. It's like, why is there a walk on the path to begin with? So walking on the path for the sake of walking on the path has nothing to do with why this path is happened to be walked on. That's the breakaway, right there. It's broken away into its own mechanism.
Right, and the questioning of that solid reality, if you will, or facets of solid reality, is the questioning of that is to reintroduce this dynamic relationship between the inner map and the outer world. In other words, have an animistic sense that the things that we are doing and interpreting out there, quote unquote, are alive, and so should be given a respect internally, that we leave it open to interpretation what it keeps saying to us, what the world keeps communicating. And this is the manifold that needs to be kind of repaired, if you will, after the damage of civilization, breakaway civilization. Right, that we keep being shunted into crystallized structures, which are cancerous in their breakaway state. That they keep doing behaviors that are no longer nourishing
pollutants.
Or supportant of what's below.
They're pollutants, because what's happening is that it's an overspill of activity, like a lot like a chemical that interacts and turns whatever it comes in contact with into whatever the shape and Structure is required of the soundbite, but the outcome itself could be very much poisonous to the producer of the said chemistry and where it's spilled from. So that's this. So talking about toxic ideas, for example,
like a reality solvent.
Right. It's like talking about toxic ideas and spinning your mind through a bad thought to the point of where you begin to believe that bad thought to the point of where you start behaving as if it was real, right? And then become destructive in that sense.
Right. Okay, so that's, I think, the cognitive alignment window and the shifting ability between narrative and objective.
Chronology overview is pretty simple. It's simply to establish the backdrop of how the current economic system developed out of the feast economy rather than the barter economy, which never really went away, and the role of gift economy and the current economy grew out of the feast economy and replaced gift economy rather than barter economy, which actually underlay and set undisturbed this entire time.
Is between enemies.
Yeah, it's an elaboration on barter economy developed from feast.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get.
So yeah, you would have barter economy, you would have gift economy, then feast economy came into place, supplanted barter economy, and developed into the current economy. Yeah. And then that gives us into guild dynamics.
Yeah, so these two are kind of maybe tightly bound a little bit.
Well, one is the antidote to the other.
And yeah, I just wanted to give like a history, if you will, of like something that would make sense to the chronology, like to the devotional.
Well, yeah. I only tried to summarize it as fast as possible so that we have the main points of what it's going to be talking about. But, but the history would be part of the chapter itself to explain why.
So after this cognitive alignment window chapter discussion, building off the dream in the moment, we have something in there that's showing that our cognition is getting stuck in a certain way.
It got stuck above the horizon.
Right, it's stuck.
The process into
and
it.
this is what allowed that breakaway civilization. So then I wanted to get into just a quick story about the feast economy and how tribes started to value production of certain goods over everything and counting.
I absolutely meant all of that just implicitly, and the only reason I'm hurrying this up along is because I want to get through the page and finish off the discussion. Yeah,
for sure. This is. I've been kind of thinking and meditating a little bit on this area, so I don't want to go too fast on it. But
we can circle back to it right after the discussion, so we can have something to piggyback off of when we go into the next chapters.
Okay, but I just want to make sure that we keep a proper, like a good narrative going. One step after.
So what I'm saying, we'll develop that after this point.
So
we will get right into it right after we're done the page. So dynamics.
So what do we do with dynamics?
So this would be like now that we've described how we got there and got stuck in the narrative mode, we basically have an ontological matrix as a result, and it's in that where we plant the seed of guild dynamics. So that's the platform into which the seed goes.
So in ontological matrix, what I wanted to mention here is that talking about the walled city and like the first kind of establishments after I guess the feast economy and all that
chronology will point to the emergence of this ontological matrix, so we will have that covered.
That exactly. So that's
perfect. And then that's where the seed goes into, and then a brief description of the seed itself, which we can do easily, just back and forth. Education. Like all of this we can do you can write and I can talk to you outside of the meeting is what I'm saying. And all of these are simple discussions for us.
So this...
I am trying to wrap it up.
I get it. and I agree. So we're giving this does push into the kind of the negative field of where did civilization go wrong? Where did the breakaway civilization happen? What did the walled city look like? What's in the mind of people? What allowed them to offload without caring? Offload without care, without responsibility, right? Even to recognize the product coming back. What allowed people to do that? That's, the cognitive alignment window being stuck. And from here on, civilization keeps going like a cancer
in a matrix of its own making.
Right. And so with this ontological matrix, we have to acknowledge that, yeah, this is what's happening, but also ontological matrices themselves aren't bad. And we can juxtapose the polymorphic machine with the market machine. So that would be market machine, which allows you to offload something and not care what comes back.
You can only use
you don't have the skill to...
All you need is currency, basically, to affect anything there.
Right. And you can be... have the wool pulled over your eyes by anybody because you can't recognize what is a product that you need.
You can only recognize the numbers in your bank account.
Right, and let's say food is McDonald's, McChicken, or whatever. Like you
brands.
Yeah, like, oh, it's good for you, but it's pink goo. Pink goo is good for you. Okay,
yep,
fine.
With that, I'm going to go.
Fine. Nature calls. With that, be redbacks. Three, two, one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. So I think at this point we're hitting the threshold of where we left off last time, and that's why I think we want to be a little bit careful. Now, if I could just take a minute here to describe. This section has been ideally let's call it positive. We're just talking about the processes of life. Diving into chronology and this feast economy and all that, that's kind of a negative point, right? We're saying where it can go wrong, the walled city and all that, the cognitive alignment window getting stuck, right? So this is kind of foreshadowing, I guess, for the next section. Now, we want to jump back to dynamics in the context of an ontological matrix, guild dynamics, to show that we can have a polymorphic machine operating in an ontological matrix. It doesn't have to be a market machine. It doesn't have to be cold, calculating, everybody disconnected, right? So this is kind of how we move through. The last part of this section is to get into dynamics and show what focus is. And what we need to do is start to introduce slowly
what can be built on top of it.
The idea of stacking and holonic type of the holonic modeling. We need that before we move into the, let's call it negative, the market machine. So that's all I want to establish, is that there is some healthy way of doing this, and from taking back.
There's the healthy way of doing this. There is a specific. We already touched on the problem with the zeitgeist. We're touching on the problem with the chronology. So in those two places, we're basically establishing the kind of atmosphere that we're planting the seed into, right? Mm-hmm. And then now, once we've done that, those kinds of what can be done about it, descriptions, we're going to pull back a little bit, what you're saying, and go into the depth of the problem itself.
Just a little bit.
What has been built up with the problematic system to begin with, as to why we are, aside from the zeitgeist and aside from the obfuscation that the previous two problems have eliminated, what is the fundamental issue with remaining with the system as is versus taking the approach that we have outlined or outlining?
Mm-hmm. Right, just to give a taste of the trajectory of the breakaway civilization. That's what I want there. And then from that to kind of again like bounce off that, we need I think to get into so focus, the areas of concern, to show, and this focus I think brings up the holonic architecture. I think
it has to.
It does, right?
It does, but implicitly, not necessarily.
In a very soft way. We can get focus also gives us something to hold on to, something concrete.
As a label, yeah.
As a meditation, as something to do.
As a pointer.
Yeah, as a soft introduction. So before we get any further. So yeah, that's what I want out of dynamics, basically, and is to also hint or show of this, the maybe the initial natural guilds, maybe a number of them, but
past environment, it becomes harder and harder to sell each successive guild.
Right. So we need to do at least a fractal recursion.
We need to do at least up until environment with a note that there's more elaboration to be had there. But it's not. But this is not a guild dynamics book, so.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
I think the actual specifics, of everything, is going to be in the field manual.
Field manual.
So if you can assume it exists hyperstitionally, you can write the book that way. And if you are ever curious about its content, you know who to ask.
Well, it's just such a superstructured thing. What I feel like I need right now is the artistic license to just
what I'm saying is that you can use it as a quote unquote reference, but the fact that it's incomplete means that I have to fill in the gaps. If you're going to refer to something but it's incomplete, you need to come to me so we can discuss it.
Ideally, that's the fast way. That would be the fast way.
We shall have Zoom meetings or something.
For sure. Damn, I was looking for a list of the natural guilds, but I cannot find them here. I just wanted to notate at least. Do you remember off the top of your head So education, immunity. Gotta be here somewhere. Environment, wait, education, immunity, environment.
Well, yeah, I'm saying we're going to have a harder time selling technology, data, economy as guilds that we can properly describe in our write-up over here and make it meaningful, right? The point is to make this book meaningful, so we need to stop short of going all the way to Sanctuary Machine.
Sure, and everything above environment is environment. Still,
Yeah, in
anyways,
some sense.
so that's fine.
So what we're not going to do is we're not going to elaborate guild dynamics in this write-up.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's
apart
why
from,
I meant.
apart from necessities.
That's what I meant by initial natural guilds.
Yeah, and this is where I'm saying the cutoff should probably be environment, because that's the
Cool.
most concrete one that you can relate to.
Agreed. And how would you describe that guild?
Environment.
Yeah.
So everything that's been done in the name of immunity is now outsourced to the objects around you, including the people around you. So not only are you being self-focused, you extend that focus onto your immediate environment, your social environment. So you make your space hygienic. You make your mental space nutritious. You make your
Yeah. Okay. So education and immunity really feel like internal skill kind of.
Well, education simply is the self-referential starting point. What is education about? About the structure of guild dynamics, which begins with education, the immunity, environment. Education in and of itself is only about the rest of the guilds. And the only description it has about itself is that it's about the rest of the guilds.
And then immunity?
And then immunity is immediately where you land on the practical end of things instead of the theoretical. The doing of the things, starting with yourself and with the addition of the environment outside of yourself. So nutrition, something
So
like nutrition becomes
immunity-
more abstract.
Immunity implies.
But it's also like having a good fridge content, for example. That's a spillover to the environment. You're shaping the environment to facilitate the same focus that you've already facilitated from yourself.
Yeah. So immunity implies a response to entropy.
Right, and then environment implies an extended response to shield against entropy further out of yourself, not just your body, but also your immediate living space.
Right.
That's the simplest way
We're
of looking
immunizing the environment, whatever is around us.
in the same arc as one's own organism is. So not just immunizing us as the subject of immunity, but shaping the environment such that it is itself immunized from whatever. So the creatures within the environment also have to benefit from, or not benefit from, but you know what I mean. Like it's a holistic approach in the sense of like you're not simply shaping yourself.
Yeah.
You're not simply shaping the environment for yourself, but for itself.
I get it. So like having handrails on a stairs, you're kind of immunizing from injury, but it's externalized into the environment.
To an extent, yeah.
Right?
It's when you stop shitting on the environment for your own sake, which, if you notice in prioritization, that comes later. You're not expected to start there. You're not expected to save the environment until you've worked on yourself. Because
Sure.
that's the platform of immunity that the environments will need to reflect in the long run to begin with.
So we have that stacking.
but also it's like
process.
but also it's to remove the whole idea of victim blaming as well. Yeah, there's self work involved, right? But you're not asked to fix the system at your own cost. You're not advised to help yourself before you even venture out into the environment to help anybody out there. Because if you can't help yourself, how are you going to help others?
Of course. Yep. Yep. And immunity to me also implies a vision or a view of the objects in space. The types of objects, a body, a couch, a chair, a window, a door, a house. These things require, in order to deal with entropy, require attention and proper design.
Yes.
Or the object will cease to exist. That's immunity is pulling that forward.
So my take is slightly different, and it's more martial arts style, because that's actually where the idea initially materialized from in my head. The word and why it's the way it is. It's because in martial arts you always work on yourself so that you don't have to fight, right? Best fighters out there have 0 fights under their records, if you will, because they know how to avoid the damn situation.
Of course.
So my whole track with immunity is more about.
I don't think it's different from what I said, though.
It's not, but my whole track with immunity is perhaps a little more about. I actually lost my train of thought on that. Damn.
How do you differentiate from simply conserving objects in space to,
Oh,
like,
my
that's,
point was actually, here's why the martial arts thing. In the martial arts perspective, I mean, if you pay attention to what martial arts
I see how you
are really
extended
going
that.
there,
I see how you extended that.
it's the detachment from these objects as this is for me, this is not for me, this is I need this I don't need that. It's this detachment of like not being affected by what else is over there, outside of yourself, and simply like this is what needs to be done, not what I want to be done, but what this is what requires. This detachment is what allows immunity to function as a framework for activity,
I'm hearing responsibility.
basically. And the detachment from the wants and the needs is because those are tugs at activities that do not fulfill oneself, but they are the ones that perpetuate the initial
Right.
negligence to which we started off the whole book with.
Right, and there's the breakaway civilization, the city-state, and all that. How things get externalized, offloaded, as we've been calling it.
Yeah, one of
That-
the things is immunity that's being
that's-
offloaded, and the immunity to
Sure.
protect yourself. You mentioned this earlier with the whole idea of sacrificing your full knowledge of your terrain and environment, being one with the land kind of thing, and the tribe, to going into the walled city and then becoming and then having this fake sense of protection from quote unquote the environment,
Right.
but an increased sense of hostility from your neighbor. Right? Like,
Right. You could be thieved, mugged, robbed.
right. And in this sense, this is the sense I'm saying that like one of the things that being robbed of shelter does is being robbed of this immunity guild. Without the foundation of being immune to begin with,
Right.
you're ripe for picking, and the system can just have its way. So immunity must be built first. There must be a detachment from outcome. There must be a detachment from incentives.
And how that happens is take building in the responsibility back into the being.
Into the core of the being. Hence, so yeah, that's the argument for it. Definitely has to be
I get it.
internalized.
So this is perfect juxtaposition against the.
This is confirming the comment, as well as as well as explaining why it's not the final destination.
It's a perfect juxtaposition against the peace economy, the walled city, all that. Apologies. But yes, it is. I agree. Very nice. Feeling the flow. Sweet. Yeah, so that's a perfect juxtaposition to get into dynamics a little bit that way with these guilds. Juxtaposition to the breakaway civilization and what has allowed people to kind of carelessly or irresponsibly offload these guilds into the civilization. The breakaway.
When you say irresponsible, you don't mean when you say it's irresponsibly, make sure you add that it's not a person's fault for being irresponsible. That responsibility has been removed from them.
Good point. Good point, I think. Right, because we're born into this, basically. We don't know what we don't know. It just adds to the soul. Okay, so yeah, I think we're about where we were.
Let's go.
We're about where we were. So
You obviously stepped over the timelines, but it's okay.
yeah. We took an extra 20 minutes, even on top of the extra 20 minutes, but it's cool. It's cool. That's the way it goes. I think it's been some great discussion, and before we proceed, I just want to say thanks, man, for being here with me.
This is my life, man.
Peace be in the journey.
This is like outside of regular, everyday, normal stuff. That's really the only thing that occupies my mind.
It's like hyper normal. Yep. Yeah, it's been wonderful this last probably 4 years of Portal Mountain.
Don't worry, everybody. It's not at the expense of getting laid.
No, definitely not.
No, that was a question posted to me. It's like if my nerdiness is preventing me from connecting with real human beings, and no, it certainly doesn't.
Right. Yep. No, it doesn't come without strains and tensions though in life and all that. But yeah, we've sectioned off every other Sunday for like, business meeting, good conversation.
Well, you know what?
Progress, if you will.
My observation is this: the outcomes of our work have always benefited us in some small way on our personal adventures.
For sure.
And because of that, we were able to not turn into these grade A assholes of like, I have the coolest thing and how dare you interfere with that. Well, we're talking about how to become humble in its most essential form. And failing to be humble with our own families would probably be a huge indicator of not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely been a huge part of our lives, but at the same time, it has never been an impediment to them either.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another great way of feedback. I mean, what does the charlatan do aside from disconnect you from your family?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and the people around you. And I've felt in a lot of cases, a lot of relationships in my life have benefited from being able to understand the model to my own limited capacity, but then to be able to translate and speak in the language of others around me, like Christian groups and
Secular groups.
Family.
Those tend to be the most prominent ones.
Friends and family. Yeah, like you can kind of translate it into, something meaningful.
Yeah, even my dad doesn't hate what I say so much anymore, which is a feat.
Amazing.
To anybody that knows Igor,
Mm-hmm.
he's not just a joke to us.
Nope.
Cheers, man.
Yeah, respect. So I just wanted to say thanks, man. We're on some kind of journey, and it just keeps going. And wherever it leads, that's okay with me.
It's kind of like a karmic. It's a karmic thanks, because there's like, I literally wouldn't do it differently even if I never got it. It's more like let's push the karma further into the good graces. Anyway,
Mm-hmm. Right.
What I'm talking about is just the resonance wake. Don't worry, there's no woo.
Just the resonance wake.
Just some secular energy healing.
Speaking of
I actually remember
secular energy healing. Yes.
I stumbled across just searching for random shit on Instagram.
Is there somebody has that?
No, we
okay, we're
that was that was me shooting the shit.
Okay.
It was when I was trying to determine what energy should be appropriated as, so it's not a woo term to begin with, and then we were having a bit of a field day with the fact that we can now appropriate New Age talk.
New Age.
Sewage. New Age sewage.
Yep, the classic.
Dude, that New Age sewage. No, New Age sewage. That's it. That's the phrase now.
It's so tough because people are feeling something. They're feeling the zeitgeist.
Well,
and
yeah.
It gets recuperated. This is New Age is the recuperated zeitgeist. That's what it is.
It's people who cannot accept Christian terminology anymore because they see it for what it is. They still cannot accept the secular term outlook because they see it for what that is.
They see it for how it's presented.
And then having zero recourse, zero language to express themselves with, except for some wishy-washy terms that kind of feel correct but have no idea why or what the fuck they mean. And so this is where we come in with our what do you call it?
Lexicon.
Appropriation. To hijack the exact same words they use and actually fill them up with not correct, but the meaning that
a coherent meanings.
That we hope will
Self-coherent meanings, potentially self-coherent meanings.
But those are really the terminology that we're picking on as far as the triggering one, as far as the triggering mythological terminology. And so naturally, because we have the complex adaptive systems, because we have grammatical stacking, which describe things in terms of power, right? The power, like the power of a stack, for example, is correlated to how many niches it could fill in. The more niches in a stack the can fit into, the more powerful it becomes, because it can draw upon many different carriers for signaling and purposes.
Mm-hmm. And this is the loop back down.
So when we see different animals within the same niche, say crocodilians, and then whale mammalians that look like crocodilians, and then
Lobsters.
Then a dinosaur-like crocodilian. You remember how we were talking about convergent evolution?
Yeah.
How there's like these slots at the top layer where
Niches.
you can just jump into, but every time somebody jumps into it, like reptiles had a certain limited power within their niche, but then when the warm-blooded animals started to appear within the same niche, so for example, when dolphins appeared on the same scene as the fish did, they religiously outcompete the fish. Like, sharks are afraid of orcas. Orcas hunt them down relentlessly. They fill the same niche. They're very, very much apex predators. But why is that? Because orcas are pods communicating with each other in a language to the point of where they have individual names.
Yeah.
Like, so they fill out these other niches upon the one that they're living in, like with the fish, and therefore become a bit more sophisticated.
Capacious.
So power, in the sense, it talks about the capacity of the stacks to reach out into more and more carriers, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And energy is correlated with that power in the sense of like the capacity to initiate it on the very different layers. So more energy, more layers you can...
Energy is like a body type of word, too, it seems.
Well, there's a capacity.
Like in that it builds up?
Grammatical capacity is just the capacity, potential. The energy it's given, it's the signals coming in, feeding into
That's
it.
what I mean, the
to,
body.
to build up whatever meaning, narrative, whatever, until that narrative is so solid that it results in actuality, in dissipating actions into something.
Right.
Or
So we are getting
so
into
power,
this.
so healing and power and all of that is a dynamic relationship of pushing that power in to build up the narrative to the point of where that narrative starts to dissipate back into number, word to number dissipation.
Healing power.
So that the resonance base goes downwards to produce. So the downloading resonance and the projected wake itself just explodes out of the stack. So they're both the same thing. The projected wake is the meaning. The projected download is the number, right? One and the same, and it's just a matter of it building up within somewhere in the stack until it just starts to.
So what's
dissipate
this healing process? Energy healing. How do you heal energy?
Energy healing in this framework would basically mean the isomorphisms involved. So the more isomorphic it is in download and resonance and projection and all of that kind of stuff, the more those things are isomorphic to each other, the more the stacks become coherent with each other, hence healing, hence the music starts to play. The more the more the resonance is disruptive to the whole system, the less coherent the whole mechanism would be, and the less health individual parts will be able to collect from it.
I'm gathering like walking the fine line, the narrow path, in using energy to heal, to heal, obviously, but
it's just a discussion of potentiality dissipating into actuality.
Right, and that actuality dissipating into a higher capacity.
Yeah. So if you're ideological,
is that right?
If you're yeah, sort of
using the energy to do something coherent.
Coherent, yes. Coherent means healing of. So if you imagine the resonance wake pushing outwards, like at the speed of light, if you will, like a wave, right? How does it affect everything it touches? Does it become more organized
Right.
and solidified, or is it just, or is that wake causing it to disperse and dissipate?
Right.
So
Okay. Yes. So
consolidation
energy
versus decay.
So energy healing is the study of structures in such a way that what is actualized in these wakes, in the waves, the download, what is downloaded ends up in a higher capacity to be uploaded, or something like that.
So when the download and the upload process do not cause destruction of the stacks involved in downloading and processing and uploading, um, meaning that the resonance wakes that flow between those stacks resolidify them and reinforce them, as opposed to
Yeah.
hold on,
Yeah, so we're getting
got a
into
phone
that,
call.
that animism stuff. Anyways,
Hello.
pausing. control, climate control. It does wonders. Okay, we're back. We are back. And so with that, apologies. There was a phone call that needed to be had. Some businesses and things to have taken care of. But at this point in time, we are about halfway through our live stream. At least we're just over halfway through, and we've now firmly planted ourselves into the topics of the second half or whatever, the second after the first third or whatever.
Yay.
This is where we left off. We're already making
we're basically
progress.
an hour over.
We're making progress though, and it's great that we've been able to reiterate the narrative so far for this book. I think it's important to keep coming back to it and developing.
It's interesting that the last conversation we just had was about complex adaptive systems and power and energy healing, because here, look at what we've got here. Carrier's agency in the strange loop.
I think it's no mistake.
So I think we can, if we're doing this for ourselves, we can just piggyback on that small talk we had. And basically, say that this chapter in particular is going to be about secular energy healing, but not that. What I mean there is that we're introducing carriers and the entire stacking mechanism all the way through to agency, right? And so in that particular analysis to begin with, that what we're just talking about is actually part and parcel of what the fuck we're just
by through
having
to
a laugh
agency,
at.
you're talking about ontological matrix.
I'm talking about having the stacking stack so complex enough that there is an agency that is using the protocols to communicate on carriers, to send out messages and interpret expressions.
But this is ontological matrix.
Well, that's
plus.
No, this would be more like the animistic worldview, out of which we can extrapolate the ontological matrix as a kind of an oncoming and appearing and disappearing stack in and of itself.
An archetype of the model, if you will.
One that can appear. One is that is detached. One is that is dysmorphic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it seems to me to flow properly, I think, from discussion of the ontological matrix, the natural guilds and all that.
And so this will give us all an ability to describe what agency is, and to top it all off with the icing on the top, what the strange loop is, how the strange loop is relevant to that structure. Because once we have that structure, we can introduce the strange loop's operational capacity into it, and with that we will have the segue into the meta-religion and animism as the full-blown structure of the universe as a backdrop upon which to make the case for it.
Right. Okay, so I'd like to develop that link a little bit better and then go into these details about the meta-religion and all that.
Well, that's
so
what
we
I'm
have
saying
2 hours. I'd like to dedicate an hour probably to this section, maybe. And then the next...
And interestingly enough, we have used some of our previous hour to already touch on this.
Right. Yeah, so we may even need less than an hour. But the last part I want to kind of switch over to the market machine and kind of like the dark side of it. I want to get introduced into that.
Okay. So we can probably use whatever we just said to try and segue into the market machine. So now that we have established an animistic worldview, which I don't know how much details we need in this. Do we need details for this? Yes, but in the discussion or in the book?
It's a discussion about the book.
So what details do we need to discuss for
exactly that's what I mean by like there are some little details.
Upload and download, resonance waves, dissipation of word into number. We've already touched on everything there.
But we just kind of randomly asked the question, what is energy healing? Right, we just randomly asked that. How do we link that to ontological matrix?
It was funny, but everything that we said in that discussion, it was a complete fluke. Don't get me wrong.
I don't think so.
But everything
not from my end, but yes.
Well, no, the discussion started as a fluke.
It did naturally kind of seem to go that way,
But everything that was been said in that discussion ended up being a description of the stacking, upload and download
right,
issues.
exactly,
And the difference between the resonance wake versus
It's
the
perfect.
upload and download isomorphic
So our question,
process.
what is energy healing? How does that relate to the first half of the book? Like, where does that come in?
It relates to the,
What's the link?
polymorphic machine.
All we need is a bridge.
The bridge is the polymorphic machine, because what we were describing is energetic healing, and energetic healing had to do with the isomorphisms that goes into uploads and
Correct.
downloads and reification in general, as it also happens across with projection and fiat resonance waking.
So this process, which we started off with coherence itself, the process of coherence is energy healing.
Right. Those are synonymous.
Right. So
So-
that
so
kind of
the-
links. That does link it all up.
And
So how do we
in
differentiate?
So energy was brought into this as a kind of a joke, but also to make the same point, from a different perspective.
Okay.
And
So
the meta-
energy is a hanging chad right now, because how does energy link into the body? That's what I think we need to establish.
So we linked it through the description of the structure itself. So we're talking about grammatical capacity. And grammatical capacity has to do with its ability to
Okay.
hug more niches
Skill.
than lower
This is
capacities.
skill. This is skill as well.
The second proportion to it is the actual action, right? So there's the structure of the machine itself, the polymorphic machine,
Mhm.
and now how does it act and react in its context in which it's sitting? And so this is where power starts to make a distinction. Power is the buildup of potential. It's what's being fed into the system through different signals, right? To either make it react immediately or sit on that information for a while and react later.
So power.
It's a buildup of potential.
Power seems like energy plus coherence, right? Because you've got this energy potential, but then the coherence is what allows it to download back in a coherent way. Because power without energy, what is?
It just allows it to build up for dissipation. As far as coherence goes, that has to do with the initial coherence of the stack, which is being fed power energy to begin with.
Right.
Right.
Things can be transmuted, though, transformed.
So power speaks to the increase of potential to act, and then energy speaks to the
Potential.
outflow of that potential outwards into actualities in the form of the resonance wake itself. So what flows out? So what flows in as the resonance wake builds up the potential. So that's numbers creating words.
So you're calling this power.
Right. You need to power is a metaphor.
And so,
So something
energy
flows
is
in, something
energy
flows
is
out.
energy is released power, downloaded
Right.
power.
So a power is a correlation to the potential to its ability to dissipate.
Which
So
can be
more
power itself.
So something is more powerful. Well, yeah. Of course, it's a matter of perspective. From one stack,
Okay.
something looks like energy. To
Energy,
the other
power,
stack
they're very
is-
similar
is-
words.
to the other stack,
Okay.
it looks like power. The difference is in what's been actualized.
Right.
And so you don't necessarily have a direct relationship to how much energy is spent with a given power, but you can also tell that a given power can exert a lot more of that energy outwards. The greater the battery, the more, right? The more
Right.
the more water you stored in your water tower,
Power-
the more of it can go throughout, and that's
power
a
as
quantitative
potential.
element.
But to translate power into energy, there's a model, which downloads.
Right, and because of the complexity of the adaptive system, the correlationship to the energy flowing in, to the power that's built up, and to the energy that power can actually dissipate into, is completely causally disconnected in the next layers of complexity. So you don't have direct correlations, you have some correlation that is indirect.
So we're talking about like higher powers and higher
Yeah.
powers.
and these correlations,
Energy healing,
and
higher
the-
powers.
And the reason that the causality between these correlations is erased is because of the laundering effect of the dissipation of word into number into action, in that once a particular meaning has been worked into whatever algorithm it has, that's all it is. The meaning doesn't matter anymore. The algorithm takes over, right? And whatever feeds back into it is potentially
incidental.
Well, it is potentially incidental in many more cases than not, aka entropy,
Right.
because this process is extremely obfuscated.
Right. Right. But higher power processes incorporate that, and there's like a bootstrapping of power.
Yeah. And to understand
bootstrapping of the energy, power into energy up and up layers.
And to understand this obfuscation,
Conservation of
one
power.
needs to simply look at how accounting works and how it transforms items into numbers, then uses numbers to do all the work, aka erasing the meaning of the items, and then whatever spits back out of that number work is juxtaposed
Often, yes.
upon the actual and it tends to
But
have a dismantling effect on the actualities.
If at each layer of interpretation, that energy coming down is interpreted through a power which is self-referential of the whole. So higher powers are actually stacks of power, which can interpret.
Which actually points to enabling. For example, like
Building
enabling
power.
and power
Right.
are like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, that's interesting. So this is like a mythology of stacking, things stacking in life.
And from this, the ego stacking is an artificial overlay to try to capture that, but in a completely
machine-like
disconnected way from the actual process that it's actually a part of to begin with.
Right.
So when you do that,
so
that's when you have the runaway.
In other words, the agents at any particular layers taking up power and converting into its own energy, those agents are disconnected from the whole itself.
Well, yeah, and that disconnection can be explained in more concrete terms as when you're behaving on behalf of whatever machine, behaving on behalf of the machine instead of in the terms of what's happening right now.
In other words, stupidity.
So when you're
literalism.
so when you arrest a person for stealing bread because they're about to starve, there's that outflow
Then you chop off
coming
their
out.
hands.
There's that outflow of disconnect that we're discussing here, where
Shit still happens in the world these days.
Where the economic
like that.
Well, yeah, where the economic premise of the action takes precedence versus the cause of the happening itself.
Right.
The happening is not connected to the market. It is life trying to survive. However, the market is clamping down backwards on it and just eliminates it as a problem to itself.
And you get your hand shot.
Or you get your body disconnected from
Both hands
existence.
shot. That too, if you're lucky. Well,
I come from a Jewish background. They used to shoot us.
Well,
right out.
And lots of
straight up shoot.
Lots of backgrounds have that tradition.
Have you ever seen those videos when they take a fragile lady, set her on a chair, and she's vomiting just because she knows she's about to be shot by a squad for no other reason than existing?
I haven't seen the vomiting firing squad
and then
video.
and then it's the saddest thing. Like you see a normal living person slump over,
of course,
and then they carry it out like garbage.
Yeah. Not to be too morbid, but this is the market machine. We feel it deep. We feel it deep inside that this is part of our soul. This void. That this is how we're relating to one another, and there's much, Was this
the market machine
like,
will tell you this is just a documentary. You're fine.
Oh, you're fine. They're
all,
fucked.
all you saw in that death is a documentary. That's not important.
But I hope you learned your lesson.
Or something.
Yep. So yeah, foreshadowing to the next chapter there, next section, market machine. So we've established, I think, that this energy and power and all that kind of comes from coherence itself, the conservation of energy and power. This negentropic force that we're talking about.
It's part and parcel of the stacking mechanism.
And
itself.
what is it conserving into, this stacking thing? So at some point I wanted to get into, remember this like cosmic solar entropy stacking, like the basic, like that more complex structures
arise due to the
dissipate energy faster, right?
Yeah.
So this is like a great myth for like the atheist scientific view, I think, to show
Mick view, I love it.
to show why the Mick view, to show why complexity of life arises, right?
Yeah. Like the negative entropy methodology is absolutely crucial to bridging that particular gap.
It's great. We've got to have that right here.
And mathematical papers are available upon request if anybody's interested. I've linked to them before.
Sure.
Several times.
This is
actually.
even more fundamental than chronology.
Yeah.
This shows the stacking in its very most fundamental way, in that this is how we can introduce the stack, I think.
It also
story.
it also talks about the primacy of nature itself. The fact that the chaos of nature is the only one thing that is actually keeping all of this going to begin with, and that is the one fundamental route to look to in terms of trying to formulate abstractions to begin with, because that is the example to parallel. Whereas modern academia tends to parallel its equations over and over, which
breakaway equations.
Yeah, when you take the equation to be the real thing,
breakaway word.
The contradictions start to come into place, because representation, as I've tried to push this thematically a little bit earlier, representation is always inherently, when sufficiently complex, runs
always
into a contradiction with
always
itself.
Contradictory, right? And this is
And
the
that's
problem.
Again, another mathematical property.
This is
not a random thought. This is a paper written by Gödel about the Incompleteness Theorem, and proved again by Turing with the stopping problem.
Right. And this is the problem of the spectacle, and the problem that any representation is not equal to that which is underneath it, quote unquote, underneath in the stacks.
Not equal to, is potentially isomorphic, but even within its isomorphism, when the full picture is drawn out, will result in contradiction.
Sure.
As a property of being the representation of the thing.
Yes. So the model is always contradictory.
And here is the connection to the word stupidity. That is the fundamental connection to that word. If you insist on on something that is contradictory to be reality,
right? Literalism.
Literalism specifically. If you insist on the contradiction, how is it not a stupidity, a stupor, a stupefying method of approaching something?
Right.
See, you'd think that these words are nouns. I'm calling people stupid. I am not. These are verbs. Stupid is an act. Retarded is an act on top of stupidity that insists on stupidity. Retarding is to slow down the movement out of the stupidity stupor. Retardation.
The effect of stupidity?
It's to double down on stupidity. It's not only it's recognizing that it's stupid, but it's also doubling down on said stupidity. That it's the way out of stupidity. and that is.
I don't think we're gonna win with that, but fine.
No. This is me. This is me and you.
Yeah, I know.
But the word retarded is literally juxtaposed upon the word
We haven't
stupid, and
quite-
it has to do with the fact that on the insistence of the stupid, rather than doing anything about it as a problem. Like saying stupid is not a problem is retarded.
What if we figured out a way to like now our camera's in the way. Because standing is nice sometimes, isn't it?
I sit all the time. You can imagine my blood flows. See, this is me reading my body.
Getting blood flow going. Yep. So then we can pace around in like a tiny circle here.
By the way, when we go to the bathroom, it's just over here. No, it's not.
That way? Yes.
Can you imagine?
We mark our territory over there.
Oh my God, there's so many.
Yeah, no, there isn't. No, don't worry about it.
There are so many donations to be made.
No, yeah, to me. Yeah. So
this is our basement.
her lovely, wonderful basement. Mom's basement, actually. You know, we don't own it, right? It's our mom.
Whose mom?
Just mom.
You bastards!
In general. The triple slap.
Mom Corp.
Yep. No, that's good.
All right, so we actually have covered everything there is about meta religion, unless you need another detail about something.
I just want to once over get this in my head. The causation from one to another. So the energy healing, I think we can do that. The energy thing. We're getting into stacks, describing stacks. Yeah. We need the narrative of the,
so you remember
the entropy stacking.
You remember your card diagram?
The card, I think you drew that one.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. The card diagram.
So energy is simple to imagine. Signal coming into the stack, right? Protocols will reify it, upload it, and a resonance in agency will occur, right? Whatever that resonance
corresponding agent.
Yeah, whatever.
In other stacks.
That's the top. Call it the top of the stack. That's
right.
The agent itself that materializes, emerges out of the whole interaction. So an idea pops in.
Sure. And it's kind of like a meta agent too, because there's so many agents down the stack.
Yeah, like so I'm simplifying it to the smallest components possible. Obviously, this is all fractal. So that's the resonance. The agent is responding. So that resonance is what you would call potential. Something is sitting up there. It doesn't mean it's immediately going to download something down the stack. It could just be sitting there, ricocheting.
Potential.
In the agent.
Right.
And if you imagine that as being a whole bunch of different stacks communicating with each other internally, just cycling and cycling and cycling the information over and over and over again, you don't have to look at it as a state, but a continuous action that just sits at the top layer, not affecting anything else at the bottom yet. However, another signal comes in, all of a sudden that gets incorporated into this, whatever is ricocheting, you start to download onto carriers. So you start talking, you start moving, you start doing this. Like you had an idea in your head, and you started to.
Yep.
That's the dissipation.
Yes.
Element.
Right.
So this is why. So this is why upload and download are not directly correlated, because inside whatever gets uploaded is another internal funhouse mechanism running around and stacking and sending information to each other. And sure, it looks active there, but from the outside it looks like it's in a state.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a mirage.
The state of what's built up to those layers.
It's a mirage. And this is why we keep trying to read off of our brain the state, but it's actually just a moving component. And you can't read it directly. You have to know its incorporation back into the download part and its interpretation of itself in itself as it keeps going.
Okay, so here's the point that I missed, I think.
So energy fills up, shit's rolling, potential, something else hits it, all of that potential now starts to dissipating back into actions and words and words and words, and more wakes and more wakes and more wakes.
So maybe here's the transition. These agencies at quote-unquote higher layers do not exist without what is below.
Oh, no.
And this evokes the strange loop. Right?
Yes.
That's the actions are taken above. They need to take into account what's below, and they shouldn't just trigger on anything. But what they trigger on and download should be holistic to what's below them.
So
unquote.
now, if you fuck up with the responses of those inputs and outputs long enough, you can set it up so that
Stacks.
You can set it up so that
Decay.
the stacks disconnect from the ability to recognize the other signals, or treat them as noise, in particular, hence neglect.
Mm-hmm.
And then neglecting to do all of those other jobs, if you will, in the download and reification process, the stuff it sends across actually is destructive in the way it comes in the reification process.
Right.
So as the stack is executing the actions that it's
Yep.
supposed to be doing, it's destroying itself.
So you're giving another exposition for why the strange loop is
Yeah.
important.
It also talks to the point of why the system is cannibalistic, which is what Paulo was talking about. This is the cannibalism. It fundamentally, through behaving on itself, is eating itself alive in the process,
Mhm.
destroying itself by
Right.
consuming elements of itself that it needs.
So this to me is the strange loop.
And consuming is a
Points
form
to-
of
points to
reification.
it.
Consumption is a form of reification, and so it's part and parcel of this of nutrition and the entire process there. So you can definitely look at nutrition as being isomorphism of upload and download.
Okay, so I'm having a thought here regarding this, the meta-religion and animism. If we take that which is below our own cognitive perceptive agencies as being alive things need to be taken care of. There needs to be a relationship
Like your plants,
between what we perceive as above as to what's below, quote unquote, in an agency perspective.
Yep.
So this is the animistic, things are alive, we need to have a relationship and a respect
Right.
for the world
So-
and the objects
so-
around us, including the objects that compose our very being.
Yeah, so
Right?
the notion of animism isn't so much about the flowery ideological
Okay.
thing. It's like, oh, pretend things are spiritual and blah blah blah, but
Right.
rather it's the very real distinction between all of the layers that make us up to begin with, being part of the same whole
Right.
mechanism,
And-
which we have dubbed lovingly the polymorphic machine,
Right.
which is the organic machine of the living.
This view is lost on the New Age.
Oh yeah,
Completely lost.
yeah. Like anything to do with energy is is an abstract
Right.
notion of some concept of thing going bzz, 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 which is not that different than what they've heard in science class. Which
Mhm.
is, why the hell are we confused? Because we don't have a background in understanding the distinctions between such things. Which is what this model is supposed to do.
Yeah, that's cool. So I feel like we've got a concrete segue into the strange loop and the meta-religion and the animism, like
Mhm.
things being alive in the stack and
Yeah,
all that.
I think
I think we're almost, that's it.
we're there.
Like, I think,
We just need to now contrast that with the market machine.
Well, we're transitioning now to the market machine.
Well, yeah, look,
part of the book.
I thought we've done this earlier, so
if-
to me, I thought we were
If
done.
you don't mind, I will signal a break.
Yep. I do
And
not
we'll
mind.
be right back. No, did not see that one. So here we are, still standing. Do you want to sit yet, or still we can stand?
No, I sit all week.
I was just appreciating how.
Don't worry about my face. You don't.
I'm
need it.
in full view here, and of course you've got this thing up.
You know,
skating.
you know what we can do? We can switch each meeting, and that way we can even it out. But I don't give a shit actually.
Fuck you.
I'll stand like this.
It's my territory. This side is my territory.
Hence, fuck you.
Yeah. Yep. So that's great. I think as far as like the book narrative arc story, I think we've completed from the ontological matrix, dynamics, chronology,
Yeah.
into the meta religion and all that.
So the meta
Animism.
religion is important in its exposition for one reason and one reason only. It's to shift the perspective onto an ontological matrix that is isomorphic with not just the market machine. How a one that can recognize the polymorphic machine at play behind the scenes, and
Right.
allows it to bridge the gap as to why the polymorphic machine has any kind of primacy over the situation, and
Mhm.
why a kind of a quote-unquote return to it makes any kind of sense.
Right. And this reminds me of a term that Spectacle Dude mentioned, and I think it's a Marxist term, but he was talking about dual power, and in the context of co-ops, dual. I just wanted to see individual. No.
Power?
Dual. Yeah,
Dual power, there it is.
Dual power. So he was saying, let's find the start of this sentence. So in that sense, it's both a means of onboarding as well as a means of organization and mobilization. As we build up our labor unions and our co-ops, we would eventually reach a situation where the institutions that labor has built would rival the ones built by capital. This would be dual power. At that point, labor would have the power to force a transition away from the old institutions and towards the new, abolishing the bourgeoisie. And
So this neglects history.
well, the idea of dual power, I want to co-opt that.
Well,
and
this dual power is the exact same duality that you find in fascism and communism. Because communism
Go
arrived
on.
communism arrived first on the scene as a system to organize the worker. So the one whose only capitalistic power is their time, right? That's the only
Right.
means of production that they
Labor.
have. Labor being the only capital they have.
Yep.
So that system was then used by the proletant to form fascism.
Proletariat.
The proletariat, yeah. That's
And I'm not.
this is the discussion of the Society of the Spectacle essay, like
Yeah.
itself. This is what it's talking about. So if you were to take that as any kind of canon, as far as
Cool.
historical
Yeah,
progression
yeah, go
goes,
on.
it basically the reason that the system originated with the worker rather than the proletariat is because they had a lack of self ability to actualize. The system would give the ability to actually make the change through the union of the people, right? This is where did it happen, might you ask? The only place it happened was in Russia, and the only reason is the ginormous distinction in the numbers of people who were absolutely fucking poor and had nothing
Right.
with the ruling power. So basically, the situation
So it was
is that
overwhelming.
there was
to the ruling
a
power.
huge working force. There was an even huger peasant force, which had nothing to, which basically got railroaded by
Okay.
the whole process entirely.
And where does that lead?
So it led into the formation of an actual bureaucratic system that can manage the worker.
Right.
it is this system that was picked
Okay.
up by the proletariat in Germany
Recuperated.
but applied to the upper class, applied to the owner. So in that schema, you have the bourgeois capitalist adopting as a bureaucracy, right? Which turns into fascism as a corporately owned
Like
state.
a collectivist type of upper class.
Corporate state.
Right.
So fascism is born out of communism from the perspective of adopting a system that allows a mechanical system that allows people to slot into it as a worker, and turned against
To
itself.
consolidate power.
So both of those things stem from one idea, one following the other. So the bureaucracy could never actually formulate it in the bourgeois side because they're all independent, whatever owners. They're all capitalists. This is basically the West. So how did the West not get to that far? Is because it didn't adopt that system. It had enough. Germany was fucking piss poor from World War One, so it had a lot of benefits from utilizing the bureaucracy, but the hate for the worker class, that stayed. And so instead of working for the worker class and railroading others, it worked for the owner class and railroaded others too. Mm-hmm. And that effect is basically the same. It's just two different classes got wind of bureaucracy, the bureaucratic machine.
Divide and conquer.
So ultimately, it's an opposite in that sense. And it's all really just a response to capital, where it doesn't work well for the people that are there. So it's all connected.
Yeah. And regarding capitalism, we've been kind of discussing I don't know how.
Well, capitalism
closely,
is the most archaic mechanism.
It is, but in a
the
sense,
laundering of currency.
So, talking about this thing that came up with Reddit, that to give credit again for bringing it up. To Mr. Misguided Spectacle, what point did he bring up? I forget.
No, you're gonna need to tell me.
I need to stand up now. So we. Or I could reread it, but. Yeah, I almost completely forget just where we're going with that, but. Anyways.
Just a sec, it's my wife, sorry.
Distractions, let me read. I'll see if I can remember what the point was. Oh yeah, it's like that capitalist realism. So this gets to Mark Fisher, the idea that this is the only true and correct system, and there is no alternative. That's kind of the view.
So that's the economic myth. That's the myth of the economy that underlies all the other systems.
But there's some truth to it. There's truth to it. That's what I wanted to dissect there. What's true and what's not about that.
All right, I'll start there and then I'll dissect that.
Okay.
The truth behind it is that it is more of an illusionary truth in that what's being sold to us as necessary is the product of the economy pretending to be the necessity that actually is necessary.
Of course.
Right? So this is the commodification element.
Right. That's what is there, what sustains us. It must be true.
Right. So the trick of the market is to replace the need for consumption with the need for survival. So that's the commodity that's being slotted into the survival slot. Consume the products of the economy, and you will survive.
Right.
And should you fight that, it will prove to you that point by stabbing you
Yeah.
with a little pokey thing into whatever slot you need to be
You will
including the grave.
You will arbitrarily not survive.
Exactly. So the trick of the system, the trinket that is that holds the zeitgeist together, if you will, is the illusion that consumption and survival are actually one and the same thing. Meanwhile, one is simply the commodity of the other.
Sure, right. But is there no alternative to capitalist modes of production in which capitalism is accumulated like a cancer and just grown, and for an individual ego is competition?
The question is whether we can feel like we're moving along and chugging along meaningfully in life without the question of how much currency is involved.
So, like,
is that the question?
What's real?
Because if you allow me to reframe this question this way, I'll answer it.
Maybe it is.
It's in the assumption that this is the case.
But what is real about this capitalist idea? Is it ownership? Is it the ownership of one's own body? Like, I have a feeling
the reality of capitalism lies in the fact that representation is part and parcel with the universe. Representation is the basis on which all of life works.
Okay.
But this is coming back to the idea of the problem of counting.
And reification.
When word gets so complex so as to be able to represent number, the effect of number on word is
overrun.
No, not overrun. The potential for it to be obfuscating and decay. It starts to decay the mythology from which word originated. So the mythology builds up in its meaning.
It came from number to begin with.
And then it incorporates number into itself. Number does something to it, specifically categorization. It allows types to become objects. Right? And now your mythology starts to narrow down and gets locked into this one numerical algorithm.
Right.
And you can have multiples of these things happening at the same time.
Right.
That's not the point. But the point is the constriction of the mythology into a specific thing. And now, not only is the mythology constricted, but the way you treat people is constricted because you're not thinking right. You're not thinking right. You have to think this way. Because you cannot comprehend the other stack. You know what I mean? Your words are constricted to these.
Sensitivity to number is lost completely, and word takes over.
The other way around. Number takes over, dilutes all the meaning of words into numerical, quantized, explanatory things, and now you get a dictionary that just says, no, this is how you use the word. And fuck metaphor.
Well, it's an entanglement, though,
for
sure.
So what I'm saying is that numbers open up the gateway into category, and category opens up the gateway into removing isomorphism by slotting things into their categories and erasing the identities.
Yes, but I mean the word itself becomes solidified to the numerical category. The word becomes no longer
word becomes number, and therefore loses meaning.
Word is lost. Yes.
And therefore half the project is to reintroduce word, to reintroduce language in the same way that is not derailed by number. Why quantification can never be a part of the model, and anytime you see quantification, it's a clue. This is not the way to look at it.
And this is a responsibility of agents on any carrier in the stack, in how they deal with their energy dissipation and how they deal with power.
So with the view that agency itself is emergent as a property of stacking, in that agency can appear and disappear in any given moment, that undercuts it into membership. So no longer do you have an ontological matrix composed of agencies fulfilling the roles of the matrix itself.
Right.
You have a membership that understands the workings of the matrix and adopts agencies willingly, voluntarily
Agency
to ride the waves.
Emerges in context.
So if the ontological matrix is the ocean in which everybody really fucking drowns, it gives you a surfboard.
Yep. True. So that's a very different type of agent, it seems like.
Yeah.
Hex yeah. All right. So let's. So where are we at, anyways?
It's
we've got 1 hour left. This was our mark for diving into the dark side, if you will, the market machine.
Just a comment on this, and that from the agent's perspective, you will not see anything but other agents, because what happens from the member's perspective is that they role play agencies with the awareness that it's not a reflection of themselves but of the matrix in which they're participating. So from the perspective of the matrix, of the agent that identifies themselves with what's going on in the matrix, that doesn't look like anything different because their identity is bound up in that ontological matrix. From the perspective of the member who role plays for the sake of the matrix,
right,
they're completely aware that the matrix is not of themselves, and therefore there's no stake in the roles being played. This is what I'm saying about like the being detached from the outcomes is all about. It's not it isn't about the game being played virtually anymore.
Climbing the corporate ladder, etc.
Right. And you know, like for examples, effect like a great examples of this kind of an effect can be found in martial artists. I was watching this one dude that just like dominates Muay Thai fights, and the only reason he does that he is because he doesn't give a fuck about the outcome of the fight. And this guy's in his 40s and he's taking on 20-year-olds, and he just fucking plays with them. And he's consistent with his explanation. He's consistent with his explanation. He's like, you think it's about speed? It's not. You think it's about power? It's not. I'm a 40-year-old fucking frail guy. That's not why I win. Well, he's not frail. Right. It's not why I win. And you watch his fights, and you see it too. He anticipates everything. He looks at the person fighting him.
All right, let's fight.
And he starts to play. And he's like, he plays, he knows, he sees your body, he sees your body position, and he'll move towards it in a certain way, knowing that it'll make you want to react this way. And then he'll move, and your fist is like right here, and he's like,
yep.
And he'll do it again, right? So it's not an accident. There's one move he did. He's like, he got the guy to like do a punch at him, and he was just like coming at him, and he knew the kick was coming, and he just like brushed it away. It was fucking intense.
Yeah.
But he made it look like a game. And why is he able to do that? It's not the speed. It's not the power involved. It's knowing what is happening right before it, right as it's happening, and responding to just that. Not to win, not to fight even. He fights. He fights, but he's like, I'm not even there. Like, I'm playing a game. Sure, it involves a little bit of pain, but he's not the one getting hurt either.
Right.
And you see it in his fighter, in his opponent's faces too. He'll do some shit to them, and they're like, "Fuck, I fell for this," and they laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they appreciate the fucking thing because they know there's something different about him. Like, they come in to win, and he's just like, okay, try. It's amazing to watch. It's really amazing to watch. But anyway, to that point, part of the whole thing, it looks like it does not look like anything until it just looks like a ridiculous comic dump on what is actually happening. That's why comics are so fucking popular with the system. That's that dump in a different way.
Right.
Anyway.
And an exploitation of the stack.
it all like I love this example because it just brings out it so concretely about what a spectacle and non-spectacle attitude looks like. Where the people looking to win, they're looking for they're so
Right.
rigid in their
They're
technique.
driven. They're driven.
And this guy is just like standing there, hands fucking down, keep one of his favorite moves, resting his foot on the opponent's guy, and the opponent is like, he's like so fucked, he doesn't know what to do. He does one thing, he gets punched. He does another thing, he gets punched a different way.
Yeah.
And basically, and this guy's just like standing there, he's like, what, and he's like just like so fearless in this, and yeah.
Interesting. Very. Yep.
It's a game.
I see where you're going with that.
And it definitely speaks to my points before about the only thing to take seriously
And it's
is
way
that
outside.
you can't take anything seriously.
That's an example of something that seems way outside of expectation of the norm of everything. And this is what the model is. Something way outside and not motivated by normal.
No,
normal
it's a
means.
complete detachment from the tugs of the system itself.
Again, not that any of us are perfect or anything like that.
I still have a salary for a reason.
Yeah, this ain't our day job. You could tell.
Yeah. Anyway, here's the market machine. Let's go.
So, yeah, I think that's great. I think we've very well introduced the meta-religion, animism, all of that, the relationship. And so there was a question, which I left between those two sheets,
Mhm.
between those two sections. It's like, what actually leads us from the polymorphic machine to the market machine narratologically? Like in this book, so we've just gone, oh, here's the circle of life and Simba and the Lion King and everything. And
Well,
it's
that's
like,
captured in chronology.
and then it's been hinted. Yes, we've hinted to this.
Okay.
But now what is our transition? Okay, we've just talked about, treating the environment around you with respect, and in the objects that you don't know them, there's uncertainty in everything, and like treat it like a dynamic
Okay, so
play. And now we're going into like a cold hard, this is the fucking Matrix.
Okay.
This is some shit. And
so two things.
how do we transition?
Two things: concrete, one abstract. The concrete bit is feast economy. So that's what we touched on. Feast economy is the springboard of the detachment. The feast economy created a buffer. A buffer for fulfilling survival needs, which could be filled with consumption needs. That's the gist of it. So the response to the survival needs, like you didn't have an immediate response from nature
Mm-hmm.
that killed you had you not taken care of certain survival needs. So the feast economy made that possible by simply allowing these great fields to be the
Like a commodity.
the catalyst for work to be done for you.
Because you control those fields.
You control those
You
fields.
don't have to do it
And if
yourself.
somebody wants to drink with you, they do the work. So
Right.
that means you have
So they're
time
showing
to
up
fuck
with
around.
they're showing up with food. You've supplied the alcohol. They got the meat.
They pay you the tribute, whatever.
You don't need to
It
hunt.
starts with that. Now, take that some generations into the
This
future
is the first
where
offloading.
where nobody is born anymore knows why this is happening.
Or how to hunt meat. You just do grain. And
Or don't
alcohol.
have to hunt meat, or they don't know why it's happening. They
Right.
don't have to do those things. This is already working for
They're
them.
born into something where as long as you keep the alcohol flowing, you can trade for meat.
So yeah, hence the delay. So the introduction of this delay and the prolonging of this delay is the catalog is a springboard of all other activities besides the point, which create all the trinkets that fulfill all possible activities in the first place.
Yep.
So it's a feedback. It's a positive feedback at that point. So the more you do this, the less
Okay.
you have to pay attention
So what
to the neglect.
I'm hearing from you is
And so the neglect builds up, And that's the neglect that we are talking about as the buildup
The
of the
soul.
soul,
Mhm.
ultimately, and zeitgeist, definitely.
Right. So we can.
That's where it comes from.
We
delay.
can reflect that again. That's a rehashing of the chronology chapter. How are we taking
it's
that
the natural
further?
concerns.
Okay, here's where I wanted to get in. So what I had here was starting with the spectrum of stupidity, diving into detail, how this actually, like, what's the mechanics of stupidity?
All right.
Objectivism,
So
solipsism.
piggybacking on this first explanation, that you've been removed from the consequences of your neglect, and you now don't know why things are functioning the way they are.
Right.
Remind me of the question.
The spectrum of stupidity.
All right. So this comes hand in hand with interpreting where you are as a given. So this is what we do to survive, consume.
Right.
Right. And
As a
this-
soundbite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like this is what's supposed to happen because it's happening,
Right.
because there's nothing else happening, right? And it points to both the disconnection of civilization itself, right? This is where it's happened. This is the key point at which it's actually taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And second to that, it's again, what's the question? I'm losing it.
We're just trying to segue into spectrum of stupidity, how this feast
Stupidity.
economy.
Sorry, it's the stupidity
Rel-
spectrum. I need to keep that in mind.
segues into that. I think that's going to be the next chapter.
So the spectrum of stupidity itself consists of taking interpretation into literal understanding of either reality or
Right.
morality.
So you've been
depending on
taught. You're raised up. Oh, Grandpa
Fiat.
owns a still. He doesn't own a still yet. They don't do still.
windmill, whatever.
Freight crushing grain. Grandpa owns a bunch of clay pots that he produces alcohol in it, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Then
And
this is just the
therefore
way it is.
therefore I have to. I don't know why. Whatever.
But this is what we do. This is how we live.
And now I've forgotten how to hunt because that's how I get meat.
Forgotten is not even the right word for it. You haven't even been. You haven't even been pulled into it in the
Right.
first
so
place.
this is the beginning of the soul as we define it.
Yeah, those
The meat,
missing
the
those
meat comes to you and you don't know how.
the missing element of how, yeah, the disconnection that capitalism makes distinct. I have to pay you for
Mhm.
for your services or products or whatever.
Right.
It makes that connection entirely arbitrary in the form of counting. Hence, counting being the problem,
Mhm.
and one of obfuscation. And when language adopts that, so why did language adopt this? Is because to keep track of all the feeling and all of the debt collection
Right.
parts.
The mechanisms.
And so humans lost their humanity in that initial stage by becoming a number on an accounting book.
Mm-hmm.
Cue in the beginning of Social Security numbers, basically.
Right. And people who question this and straight off, they can go fuck off. The core tribe who keeps doing alcohol and keeps supporting the tribe.
We're
This
not
is the
talking about you
objectivist.
guys, not the listeners. The people that keep questioning it back then.
Yes, back then, of course.
Back then. I totally misinterpreted that.
I mean,
by the way.
I'm right. Yeah, I'm back in the day right now.
Yeah, so
Like-
the people who rejected the system, they can go fuck off because it's all obviously working for everybody else,
Yeah.
except
Right.
for a couple of few. And now we have
Who
the
wish
beginning.
to still have a
now we
relationship
have the
with
beginning
the land.
now we have the beginning of crazy. Now we have the beginning of criminal.
Right. The outcast of society.
And then we have the people that don't understand why this is yours because land is land. And people are people.
Right.
Then now come encroaching into your territory, and suddenly you have enemies, and you now need armies and policing and internal, external,
And executioners.
and those are the perversions of the immunity guild that these events
Right.
have been
Right.
actually modeled after.
Perverted immunity guild. Just to keep the thing going. We do
Right.
alcohol, we'd have this field,
So-
we own it.
So instead of
It gives us
protecting,
power.
so instead of protecting the shelter of the people, instead of protecting the the environment in which the people have lived, those things have now turned inwardly onto the people that are in the environment and outside of the environment as a precaution.
Right. Yep. Segregation.
And how is that not a commodification of the original thing? In the original formulation, you protect yourself, you protect your tribe, obviously, because life involves hardships. Now you are paid as a professional soldier with rations.
I like this camera view, by the way.
Disconnected. What are you protecting if not just whatever rations you're getting? So you're not connected to the whole that you're even functioning with.
You're having certain objectives. These are the objectives that matter.
But you're disconnected from life as a whole.
Right. Well, I've had enough of standing, honestly.
So what the problem of counting is really demonstrating is that all words, once transformed into a numerical value, are fair game on the market, regardless of the word. And so, how do you not get obfuscation from that point forward?
Yep.
That's all you can get, because everything is laundered. Every meaning, every need, every desire is some kind of trinket to be sold as a gadget. Whether it be a name or an object.
Right.
Basically, that statement is to say all of the reifications that we are left with have no coherence.
And so I'm trying to link this with our discussions previously on the spectrum of stupidity, objectivism and solipsism. I can see a lot of objectivist things rising up here and saying this is the way the world is. We all agree that this is the way it is.
They are connected.
Where is the solipsistic angle in this mess?
In this mess, the solipsistic angle is connected to it through the admission that only things are real. So the difference between the objectivist and the solipsist is in the type of thing that is allowed to be real, or rather the criteria for which reality is asserted. In the objectivist sense, reality tends to be asserted by an authoritative mechanism. So an authoritative mechanism being an equation or something to that effect, an experiment or a paper, what have you,
right, like the market itself of selling alcohol for meat.
To put the sound bites all together in a way that flows completely logically. On the solipsistic side, you don't necessarily care about the logic of the statement, but rather the rewarding quality of the suggestion being made, which is sold to you as being the real thing, but reality is not what's actually being reality is not the goal in this case. What's the goal is morality, and so the feel good element of the thing is tied with whatever moral system one has. Ethics specifically is the word for it.
Right.
So judgment values differ in the objectivist side based on reality, whereas judgment on solipsistic side is hinged on ethic.
Okay.
So whether something is moral, it's good.
So
whether something is real, is
on
good.
the solipsistic side, the fact of a feast and a festival happening and everybody feeling great, that's is like itself. We are in the zone. On the objectivist side of that, it's the fact meat is being provided. I do this, and then
our needs are being met.
Right. It's more of a kind of calculating type of perspective, but both the different sides of stupidity, right?
Yeah, one really hijacks the quantitative element of experience. So really taking the problem of number to its end, if you will, in terms of what is allowed to be thought, right? Like it uses numbers to the point of where it's using to denote who's sane, who's
Like,
crazy.
There's so much partying happening. How could it be bad?
Right. Empirical evidence, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
On the solipsistic side, it's...
Oh, wait, no, I was thinking solipsistic there with that comment, but
Oh, sorry.
objectivist.
Yeah, but on the solipsistic side is whether everybody involved has more an agreeable attitude towards whatever the thing may be, the idea. So that it matters less about the idea's reality, but the but the so
What the individual gets out of it?
so like belief in God, right? Belief in God is judged solipsistically in that whether you say so or not. If you say you are a God-driven individual or a God-fearing individual, it's an ethical sort of statement in that you have your built-in authority within you, if you will, and
Right.
because of that, whatever choices you're making will be much more ethical, hence much more good. Right. So it all boils.
Yes, the two sides.
So
I
they
see.
so both they're opposames in the sense that they both break down in what they call good, right? On the objectivistic side, the real is what's good. On the solipsistic side, the moral is what's good. But
Right.
but it's one of the same traps. It's like things can be good or bad.
Right.
Is the same to them.
Yes, that's the stupidity part.
That's the stupidity part. So on the objectivistic side, what things are become objects. On the solipsistic side, what things are become ideas. And obviously everybody jumps between the two insanely frequently in a way that you can't even pinpoint who's who, right? Even the most objectivistic purpose are solipsistic in some sense, in that they feel like their objective system gives rise to some moral system,
Right.
for example. And likewise, other way around, where you have the Bible thumper saying if you don't know God, you can't be good. You don't have an objective. That's the irony of it. You don't have an objective standard by which to go, which is extrinsic, obviously.
Right. Yes. Well, with that, if I may, call another short break. We got about 40 minutes left. Let's call it half hour.
We have less than 40 minutes left. But
Let's
yeah.
call it half hour until we bolt out of here. But yeah, so far so great. We actually touched into the market machine a little bit, and I don't know if you'll agree, but the spectrum of stupidity, I think, is the great, like this discussion right here, I think should be the first part. We have a number of different chapters here. They're not necessarily in order. I don't know if the order is right. We've got the ego agent matrix, the market machine, the chronology of spectacular systems in its full, ego stacking, reform, revolution, disintegration, the death circle. So we've got a number of like dark cloud issues, which
all of which have been touched upon already.
Yeah.
Because those other explanations incorporate those happenings.
Just barely, in a kind of positive, happy
Yeah, so
way.
this is going to actually just extrapolate the concrete things.
Right.
The one comment I have about stupidity is that it's we don't have a strong conversation on this one, but sadism and masochism are really
We did a couple
are
on that.
really an integral part of objectivism as outflow. So you can call objectivism as an ideology, but the activity, if you will, that stems from both of those spectrums is one of sadism,
masochism.
yeah, sadism and masochism. And obviously, again, since most people cannot be attributed to just one category like that easily,
Right.
What you find is that people have what do you call back and forth sort of
Mm-hmm.
incorporation of
Multispectral.
this activity.
Right.
So at some point somebody's more exerts dominance in fiat disconnected, and some people are exert
Right.
submissiveness in fiat disconnected without proper isomorphic communication in the horizontal sense or in the in the reification sense. If they're not fulfilling each other, they're just being doormat and
Stacking.
and a cock.
The ego stacking context here, in
That's
which
exactly it.
your manager is, let's say, masochistic to the employees, but sadistic to the employees, masochistic to his superiors,
boss,
his
yeah.
quote unquote.
And
his
so
or her.
and so him licking ass for his boss causes him to
Right.
just rage upon unsuspecting teenagers
Just
who
give
have
it even
nothing
more. This
who
is
have nothing to do with anything.
The sadomasochist. And with that, we'll take a short break.
Nothing happened. I am not ashamed. I'm gonna stand.
Standing times? Again? Fine. Fine, I'm okay with that. We'll have to adjust.
You don't have to stand. You can just sit.
But I have to at least
We can be
half,
awkward.
I can half, there we go.
Yeah,
See?
man. This is nice.
Half and half.
All right, let's just plug in through the next of the points. We spectrum of stupidity.
So first off, great introduction to spectrum of stupidity, the objectivist, solipsistic, the masochistic, sadomasochism, and all that of this stack.
The sameness being in their believing in that things is what's real. The counterpoint to that is what we've had all along, is that things are what we call representations of things, and therefore are never things in any way shape, or form to begin with.
Again, literalism,
Hence the mistake.
stupidity, of course, spectrum of stupidity.
Yeah. Hence the
Okay.
mistake, and why keeping on that spectrum is not ideal.
So, so into the section on market machine, we're diving into the spectrum of stupidity a bit deeper than what we did. We did bring it up somewhere there, just to get into chronology, just to barely touch on it.
So
We did-
ego
we did-
agent matrix is the next thing, though.
According to, so this isn't a set in stone thing. I did kind of order them. I tried to order them logically. But yes, so now we've established, we dive into the spectrum of stupidity. The ego agent matrix goes into the ontological matrix. So we're discussing
and-
now an ontological matrix
And
based
this-
on stupidity.
Right. Okay. That's what I thought. And in this case, hence the ego. So this gives us a segue into taking the ontological matrix and using it as a playing field for describing what agents are and what they look like. And now we're dissecting an agent into an ego stack. Right. So we've taken the ontological matrix.
Sorry, say that again.
We've taken the ontological matrix as a starting point, the backdrop. We're
Yep.
picking on the fact that
This idea of agents and stacks.
interacting in forget stacks, agents interacting in
Over
an
carriers.
ontology. Because remember, the agents have access only to the superficial elements of all stacks that they're connected to.
Sure.
Right? Everything
course.
else is noise. They don't see it. It's there, but they don't see it. It's the invisible world, if you will. Look, so the complex adaptive systems and all of that stuff, that's below that. There's only like the sound bite and what is constructed from sound bites.
So what's right in front of their eyes
Right.
of the agent?
So the mythology, the marketing mythology, and everything else.
Right. So we're moving to the ego agent matrix.
So what we're doing here is like we've divided this matrix, so we have a grid, if you will, of agents.
Right.
We zoom in on what an agent is, and now it turns out to be nothing. It's an ego stack, and all the layers below it are ego stacks, and all the layers that are parallel to it are ego stacks.
Right.
Like whichever way you go, all you see is ego stacks. Basically, the entire matrix culminates in a ginormous ego stack that is fighting with itself at war at the bottom.
Yes.
And
Yes,
with the
yes,
elites
yes.
at the top,
Yep.
communicating as if they're friends.
The flame chart, as we call it, the ego
Yeah.
stack flame chart.
That's the picture you want to have.
Juxtaposed with a more kind of wishy-washy stack of agency in which agents are emergent and not bound to certain artifacts.
So we've given that backdrop already, yes. Now we're saying how it's hijacked. So we're going to use those points to say this is how it works, this is how it's hijacked,
Yep.
this is what it looks like hijacked.
Great. I like that we can do that. Show the positive first and then show the fall, if you will. That's key.
If you're going to fall from something,
That's key.
you need something to fall
Don't
from.
just complain about the world. Right? This addresses
Mhm.
that critique.
So yeah, in doing that, the ego matrix stack is going to now display full-fledged on the disconnected nature of ego and agency and self. And with that, we're going to describe obfuscation. The market machine is going to be simply described as clouds of activity which transform this activity into numbers, send those numbers across to some other cloud.
Right?
This is the entire picture of capitalism
Yes.
is trying to sell us to be like
Right.
correct, and we're going to show it as being a cloud of fuck all.
Clouds being delineated from each other via obfuscation. In
Right.
which the
Whatever is
tree
happening
of-
in the cloud.
The
you
tree
can't
of
see.
life is no longer mapped or modeled here.
Mm-hmm. And all you have is these clouds and their lines of numerical computational outputs.
Right.
So like
And machine-like interactions.
so anytime you see an arrow between, like in that diagram I have for clouds, obfuscation and stuff, I
Yeah.
have one. All you'd ever see is information traveling across as number, not as word. That's the key. That's why things are obfuscated to begin with, and why things are remaining as cloud, because meaning is
Right.
not actually being translated.
You give me one of this, I'll give you 3 of those. Okay, deal? Fine.
Right. So it begins and ends with numbers. Meaning is found fucking nowhere.
Right. How did this one get created? How were those 3 created? Who did that? What was it all part? It's laundered, in other words, laundered through pure number.
Hence, the numerical problem creates the obfuscated meta-narrative, and the obfuscated meta-narrative requires the 33 myths to maintain itself, just one of them being the progress.
Right. Okay.
Numbers needed to increase.
And by 33 myths here, you mean 33 things that just don't come into question, because if they did, we would realize the inherent what you call
Zeitgeist.
it, discrepancy, the inherent contradiction.
The quality of its wrongness.
The word I'm looking for is contradiction, inherent. If we question these myths, the point of myth is that you don't question it in normal workings.
Well, myth, as defined by the model, is nothing more than the narrative which one believes to be true.
Right.
The narrative that has rapport, the narrative that has been taken on faith.
And without the ability to shift the cognitive window on that narrative and take it piece by piece,
Its
without that
constituents,
ability,
yeah.
it's real, and it's permanently real in a stupid way.
Yeah,
It's objectivistically real.
In a stupid way, meaning specifically that it is entirely bound up in representation without any relevance to actual experience.
So mind-body disconnect, right there, motherfucker. This is where this breakaway civilization comes from.
Yeah. The delay is one way to look at it. The delay between consequence. Right? If survival is sold as a commodity for consumption,
Delay is a good word.
you can only
Because
do...
karma comes to get you, as
You
they
don't...
say.
That, the point being there is that karma doesn't exist before that point. Because the actions of nature are
Right.
reactions of your actions.
And it's like dissipated right away somehow. That's the
The
impression.
introduction of this delay allows for the account to build up. Karma introduced in this sense is introduced with civilization, not before it. It's the ability for having accounts to begin with, which is the fucking
And
problem
I
of
think,
numbers.
Again, though, these are normal processes that we should expect to arise. But the question is mastery
Yeah,
of
you
them.
can obviously count 1, 2, 3
We're
when
not
you're
saying
looking at
that,
something.
that this doesn't or shouldn't happen. This is a natural...
Yeah, counting is not something that doesn't happen naturally. Counting is a problem in itself when your language is shifted by that perspective in the first place and removes and transforms.
So
in the secular sense, all words are effectively numbers, meaningless as fuck.
right, it's wrapped back down onto it without remembering how it became a word from the number to begin with.
And the evidence for it is the dictionary.
Me scusi?
Right? Like, the dictionary comes about is to stop people from bickering about metaphors.
Right.
And it even has the wonderful effect of telling you that metaphor is the unreal interpretation of something else.
The unreal.
Right.
No, actually,
Right
this is
there.
what allows you to get to the real. Is through
No,
analogy.
but you see, like in the most objectivistic
Everything must be
interpretation-
described in a
Yeah.
contradictory manner.
Right.
All of it. It's all representation. None of it isn't. This is the problem of the spectacle.
That's not what I'm saying, but you're right.
Right?
Yes, it's just not what I'm saying.
Just to bring it back to that core point, you know?
Yeah.
We have to deal with this, and we have to acknowledge that expressions
All right.
made
So the chronology of spectacular systems next in line
are
is
automatically divorced.
is actually going to be a further exposition about the delay that we've talked about and its effects. Ego stacking is going to be about
Divorce, that's a new model term, by the way, capital D, divorce of expression from reality.
from the experience, not reality.
The creation of reality out of experience.
So reality
I know.
is
You
the
know, we know.
objectivistic goal, right?
I'm just calling divorce as a term.
So reality is the one end of the spectrum of stupidity, and morality would be the opposite end.
Interesting as fuck.
So both of them are the extremes of the spectrum of stupidity. Reality and morality. That's right. We're railing on morality. That's right. But
Morality.
we're not going to be saying that it's relative. We're not going to be saying that it's absolute either. We'll get to that.
We didn't
we'll
say
get to
much
that.
on that yet.
No, we'll get
Should
to.
we have a stream on morality
We should have a stream on morality, but
and justice?
But it would be a mistake to
Morality and justice.
It would be a mistake to try to extrapolate a lot out of it from this conversation alone.
That's tough. No, we're not even going there. So we're marching down this little stack here: the spectrum of stupidity, the ego agent matrix, the market machine.
All right, and then we're gonna get into what it looks like ego's mechanic.
Ego stacking.
Yeah, ego's mechanical structure. I think this would be like the kind of case for it, in which we are going to make the case for how mythology churned through sound bites of the market machine, regurgitates ancient mythology in a way that ensures its own stacking mechanics.
That sounds like recuperation.
So this is what this is the recuperation. This was the job of the priest, which is now the job of the professional. To spin ancient mythology in such a way that justifies the current stacking of ego itself. And so the details behind alpha, beta, omega divisions within pseudo-mother, pseudo-father construct is going to be the basis for that, and the basis, and that is another metaphor for the nuclear family, for which every spectacular civilization drives at.
So this is kind of a dear topic, I guess, for anybody who has experience through a family and here's kind of a bashing of or a supporting of.
I have a side note for this. The nuclear family is not the final stage.
Like,
the final stage is going to be mechanical reproduction.
Right, fine. And if you're talking about stages,
the reason is very simple. It's a mechanism of wealth transfer. So the siloed family is a mechanism of wealth transfer that is easily controlled from the perspective of the system.
Yeah, that's.
And then the next phase.
That's like some Alex Jones shit right there, man.
And then the next phase, controlled reproduction, mechanical reproduction. When human beings are no longer born but are grown on a farm, is the final stage of creating the machinery that the system needs to slot into itself.
Oh man, oh man.
And if that doesn't conjure up a little bit of Matrix imagery, I don't know what will. Interestingly enough, there is papers coming out of China at the moment about the artificial womb.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I thought I might have had a picture or something like that, but no, I don't think I do.
Oh, it's cool. Like I'm not saying we're gonna see that in our lifetime, probably not even another lifetime, but if you were to look at the trajectory of the system itself, transfer of wealth is an important question of it. And
Sure.
the nuclear family is right now is the most feasible unit for wealth transfer for the system. It's as narrow as it can get. It isolates a couple into a single biological pair, right, for reproduction, and
That's all you
and
need.
enforces a legal system on top of that to say that wealth can only be transferred so long as the DNA matches or some shit like that, or some signatures match, depending on where you want your writing to be, where you want your representation to be real, right? Like the nuclear family is literally
Right, no, I
is
agree.
literally a
It's like
reflection of the elite only of the elite.
it's a reflection of that, but also a reflection of below, because you have literally a biological pair that creates children.
Sure.
This is a unit that satisfies the conservative aspect as well as like the whatever your fucking future vision
Well,
is.
this is the perversion.
But society has to be
It perverts the coupling of the biological pair.
Society always has to be transitioned from one viable structure to another viable system, right? You don't just have an unviable system in your history,
No,
because those die.
So that's
The
not
nuclear
that's not-
family. I'm saying to analyze
No, I
structures
agree-
of society
I agree with
is
this.
look at the nuclear
I
family.
agree.
It does sustain culture and this and that and that. Blah blah blah.
Yes, but no.
Humans get replicated.
Yes,
out of
but
it.
no. The
And
difference
it's a transition
being,
between
Hold on,
past and future.
let me interject.
Go ahead now.
No, you're right. In that it is that, but it's a mirage, and the reason this is a mirage is that transfer of one moment to the next was collective. No single family lived in a silo. Tribes were everywhere, and even tribes were
Right.
were contextualized by their relationships
Agree.
with the other tribes around them. So at no point is there's an isolated individual,
To your
quote
point,
unquote.
was there
So-
there never was an actual isolated nuclear family, quote unquote.
Right.
Never existed.
So what this idea is doing is
I get it.
it's starting to spark what points of you know how metastability is is used to like change
Yeah,
one
this-
phase into another.
Dude, the family in a home is a niche.
You have
Evolutionarily, it's a niche that
it's like
things can come
tempering with
into.
steel.
You've got a group
Have
in
you
a
ever done-
shelter.
have you ever,
a small shelter?
have you-
You're replicating units of humans. You have a small house, small footprint, a postage stamp of property, a house. Now you make a family. Boom. This one, your neighbor right there, does one too.
Have you ever looked at
This is the
metalworking?
smallest unit of functional reproduction of the
Like
human
metalworking
being
at all?
in society.
Have you ever looked at metalworking?
I welded a bit.
So iron infusing with carbon and all of that crap.
And I know carbide.
So
yeah.
one of the things that makes like different steels, different qualities,
For one is having
there's
carbon
stronger,
imbued
and
into
then
it.
there's stronger, and then
But more
there's
brittle.
and then there's brittle. Yeah,
With
how
the
brittle
stronger you get, quote unquote, you're more brittle.
you are. Yeah.
The more malleable you are, the more you're gonna dull. But
Yeah.
at least you won't
But
get
the-
shattered all the time.
But between them there's like weird combinations.
You're in my guild right now.
So what I'm saying
I'm
saying
master
is
on that shit, man.
what I'm saying this is that if you impose external forces like that onto steel, right, you're going to tamper with the way it naturally sets at the end. So one of the things you can make it do at the end is you can cause the different nucleations to happen quicker, right? And if nucleations happen quicker and more rapidly, you get different orientations in the crystallizations.
Sure, yeah. Oh,
and,
yeah.
And if you get different orientations and crystallizations,
It must have advanced.
on the more fine scale.
Think
you
about
get that hardness that
the
you're
most
talking
basic
about.
thing is literally cooking iron with smoke around it, so that carbon literally impregnates into the steel around it.
Sure, there's that part too.
However,
but I'm talking about
I'm
nuclei-
just telling you the original. you take the thinnest sheet as you can produce and put that in the kiln in stacks and then melt those together. That's what impregnates the carbon, because the carbon comes from the heat of
Yeah.
wood imbuing into the iron.
Absolutely, I'm not
So
denying.
you make the thinnest sheets and then sandwich those, and now you've got lots of carbon, and that's carbide.
That's awesome, but
That's steel carbide.
But I'm talking about tempering specifically, and the reason
Tempering also folding, like they did with the samurai sword.
Let me finish.
300 folds.
The point being is that if you have quick, rapid nucleations happen due to external forces enforcing that, you get differences in
in
orientations.
This is timing.
When you don't do that to a metal, what happens is that nucleations happen slowly, and so the nucleation ranges
Happens in random.
the
originating
nucleation
from many
ranges
different
are
places.
much bigger.
Right,
So
like
you
it-
have much more and
How a crystal
that's
spreads.
far or more
I see that.
organic. And so tribes that live together, coming back to tribal stuff, tribes that live together for long periods of time are in a rhythm. Right? They're not apart from each other either. So when
Right.
the system
So we're talking
comes
about
in,
the guild here.
yeah, when the system comes in, it's the same as doing this rapid fucking tampering bullshit, in which you get different orientations for everybody so rapidly that when they come in contact with each other, the only consequence is conflict. There's some truth to this. But on the surface, it also creates a hardened, fucking quote unquote civilization that can.
That's an interesting metaphor, isn't it?
But it's also interesting in that steel becomes more brittle when it hardens, or becomes more soft when it's more elastic. So you still don't get away from the balance. Right. You just get shoved into one slot of the potential, and hence the mechanism
all together as that one slot. You
Yeah.
become a single metal that all shatters at once, instead of kind of a diaspora, dichotomy, or whatever.
Right. So for all the perceived resilience of it, you've become much more, and much like with steel, now that you have this hunk of fucking metal with you, in order to keep it, you gotta really work for it. Like, you gotta maintain it in a specific space, which you have to create. And you have to come back to it over and over and over and over and over again. So who's servicing who? Or what is servicing what? Which stack is now in service of which?
Right. And society
Which
is so
algorithms
complex.
are in service of which?
Society is so complex that not any one of us could possibly really pay attention or service or take care of the whole.
No, but coming back to the metaphor, is tampering with steel bad? See, it's not. Like,
No.
in and of itself, it's fucking nothing. But what is happening is that now that we've tempered the steel, we've fucking laid it so much out, all we're doing is maintaining the fucking thing.
So you've got carbide tips on your blade that are just like chunks welded into a saw blade or whatever, and those get sharpened. But the flexible metal iron parts of the blade aren't carbide. It's all normal blade. Let's say for a saw, just circular 12-inch saw, 10-inch, whatever.
Kitanas.
But the chips, the ends, the tips that's actually hitting the wood as it spins, that's a little block of carbide. The whole thing doesn't have to be made shattery like that. You can just weld the where it's needed for this thing that never needs to be sharpened.
The algorithm of how to make it like that.
Never you need to sharpen it. Relatively.
Hello. We are definitely.
Not to mention, of course, we are at 3:54 minutes in our live stream. So, of course, these have been the last wrapping up remarks. And we'll pretty much call it there. I'm glad we got deep into the market machine stuff.
You
we still
mentioned something very interesting, which I like to leave a small note on.
Sure.
In that you mentioned a point of like now that you can figure out that you don't have to have carbide tips, but you can have softer metals underneath the teeth and all of that crap. Well, guess what happens? What's the next point? Now you're servicing all of those layers. Not only did you create your carbide steel layer and need to maintain it,
just that.
the maintenance of that carbide steel by pushing it off to the softer steels ensures that you now have a bunch of layers to take care of on top of the teeth in different ways. So the mechanism itself explodes, and you are more of a slave to it than you were before. So, is tempering bad? No.
Is it bad?
Is being in the service of tempered things bad? That's where we get tricky in our exposition now, don't we? Like, because we're not saying fuck the system.
No.
So that's not going away. You're just pointing to yourself.
I know. No, we're literally
I was trying to burp.
the last minute here, pretty much. So, just thought I'd have a little fun and.
Yeah. So, the main point is that no matter how much you try to apply more technology to technology,
Yep.
the end result is more servitude to technological machinery.
A paradox.
So is it a resolution to life's problems, or like alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems?
Yep.
Interestingly enough,
You saw that
the
background,
chronology of
didn't you?
spectacular civilizations begins with
Problem and solution to all of life's problems. I had this up as the background for a bit. I don't know if you saw it.
No, I didn't.
I put a meme up. So you probably saw Homer subconsciously. Here, read the meme.
No one in the Bible had the Bible. Okay.
I just had that up. Anyways, that's it before we overrun our time, ladies and gents.
Real life.
Super. Peace.